even people that have that are holding their own keys, they've taken on a lot more risk than they think they've taken on. They've had somebody else install the software for them. If you use a hardware wallet that you get shipped in the mail, you pop that into a malware infected computer and you're hodling. Like, you're already taking on way more risk than I would take on. That seems super, super risky to me. So you're probably, if anything, you should be researching cold storage methods and finding out ways to not be part of the victim group the victim wave that's about to hit. Because as Bitcoin gets more valuable, I think we're going to see a lot of trusted security products turn out to be exit scams. And so that's where I think all you guys should be pouring your effort into. If you've somehow scraped together a couple whole Bitcoin, you guys are super privileged, and you should be focused on not losing what you have. Defensive technologies, not trying to take on more risk and get it from 2 Bitcoin to 2.2.
Hey, thanks for bringing me up, Hal, and JW. You were actually just touching on something that I actually wanted to ask you. Like, I've been holding Bitcoin for like 4.5 years, but I've just always been nervous about putting it, like taking self custody of it, kind of because of what you just said. So, I mean, if you do take self custody of it and you have the hardware device with you, or you put it onto a titanium plate or something like that, what how do you personally secure it yourself? Because I'm trying to self custody, but I like want to do it, you know, to a point where I'll be comfortable with it. So could you possibly expound on that?
Yeah, sure, man. So before I tell you how to do it, because there's going to be pain in the answer, right? So, like, you just basically came into the doctor's office, and I'm about to tell you how great chemotherapy is, but first I have to tell you how bad cancer is, right? So here's the situation that you're in right now. You have this incredible asset that allows you to secure it in a way that no government on earth could take it from you, and you've given it to a bank that any government on earth, any thug, any group of insiders could collude and walk away with it. One of the ways that you can find truth in the world is through insurance rates. So, for example, with global warming, like, is global warming bullshit or not? Well, look at the insurance rates on beachfront property, right, and how much they've gone up. And the answer is they haven't gone up because the insurance companies don't actually think that the seas are going to rise, right? So you take that for what it's worth, but that's where people put their money where their mouth is, right? If you look at the insurance rates that people like Coinbase and Kraken and these guys are having to pay for the assets that they're holding, it's like 30%. So if you're holding $100 billion, or not 100 billion, let's say you're holding $1 billion in Bitcoin on Coinbase. Coinbase is having to spend $300 million a year to somebody like Lloyd's of London in order to have somebody else take on that risk. In other words, it's insanely risky. But these shitcoin casinos are so profitable that they can afford to put that risk on somebody else. That doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get your Bitcoin back. What it means is that it's really risky. And so you should be concerned that you're going to get your Bitcoin back. And the insurance companies will see if they are actually solvent. But it's not going to be a bad day for me when it turns out that they aren't. The other thing that you need to know is that the only reason they can cover that incredibly expensive risk is that they're making a ton of money, but competition is coming in at a pretty rapid rate. So what's going to happen when their profit margins go from insane to just very good, but their insurance rates are still insane? That's when I think we're going to see a big wave of custodial Bitcoin walking away. And the solution is to use something like the project that I work on, which is yeticold.com. That's like a setup script and a guide that walks you through using Bitcoin Core to do a multi-sig setup. But there's other stuff out there too. The important thing is that you absolutely want to use Bitcoin Core, and you absolutely want to use multi-sig, and you need to go through a reasonable process to like have good hygiene on the computers that you use to do that.
Yeah, and then I'll just follow up and say, definitely appreciate that, JW. Different people have different opinions on this topic. You can definitely dive into various different aspects of that and figure out what's right for you, but just kind of throwing out an alternative there as well. Just, try to do your own research and figure out what's most appropriate for you.
Dude, the advice that I just gave, nobody disagrees with it. The advice is use Bitcoin Core, use multi-sig. The only people that will disagree with that are gonna disagree because they have something to sell you.
I mean, I would disagree that using Bitcoin Core is an appropriate way to handle self custody from somebody that's asking a question on how to self custody. Again, there's different ways of going about that, but I'm just saying that there are alternative opinions here. So just take that.
Well, of course, there's alternative opinions on anything, but if you're going to espouse one of those alternative opinions, I'm going to make you defend it.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'll go ahead and say if the gentleman was interested in self custody, maybe he should consider a hardware wallet. And that is the easiest way to get off of a centralized exchange and also keeping everything as simple as possible while also increasing his security and self custody.
And do you actually know what you're talking about, or are you just repeating something that somebody else said? Because I'm
Man,
not going to.
I am providing alternatives to selling your service, and I know you're not selling
My
it.
service, yeah,
I understand
there's
that.
no service to sell. So
I
why'd you
understand.
say selling my service? It's
Because
free open source
you're
software.
trying to show people tell people to go to your website and follow your instructions on how to self custody, and there are alternative opinions to that perspective.
There are, of course, there's alternatives, but let me address this whole idea that you can just grab a hardware wallet and be better off. Let's say you go grab a Trezor. You can look through my Twitter profile and see that there was somebody that lost their entire life savings on a Trezor. The guy that puts on the BitBlock Boom conference, it was his friend. And the reason that he lost it was fairly simple, but it would absolutely apply to anybody that you're giving this advice to. And that is they bought the Trezor and they followed the default instructions. Now, when you buy a Trezor and you follow the default instructions are absolutely terrible. They tell you that, first of all, the software that's on the Trezor is pre installed. So you don't know if that Trezor is really going to generate random numbers or not because you don't know what's on there. You have to trust the person that installed it. That's very basic, like crazy. Like nobody would buy a laptop for a high security application and then have some random dude install, some random company install the software for them. So that's a problem. That's not where it bit this guy, but that's a very obvious like duh, right? So if you're going to do it, the guide should definitely be you wipe the device and then you put the software on there yourself so that you know what it's running. But the other thing that it tells you to do is to use basically Trezor's node, right? And to install the software on whatever computer that you happen to have laying around. And if that's a malware infected laptop, which most laptops are, you've got yourself into the worst possible situation, far worse than Coinbase. If you have your money on Coinbase, you have 2FA, you have a couple other things. It's not great. I don't recommend it. But I would never recommend somebody take their money from Coinbase, use a malware infected computer, use Trezor's node, and use a piece of hardware that has the software pre-installed on it. It's an absolute disaster. So what happens now is everybody says, "Oh yeah, just use a hardware wallet." What they're giving you is the worst advice in the world because it's the default setup of a hardware wallet. Everybody actually looks at those setup guides and will say, "Oh yeah, that's terrible." But you can do this. You can roll dice. You can use multi-sig with multiple devices. You can use Spectre or whatever. And all of those things are true, and they are better than the default setup. But 99.9% of users that hear I should buy a hardware wallet go and buy a hardware wallet and they follow the instructions that came with the hardware wallet. And those are absolutely awful.
Yeah, JW, can you explain like your solution and how it differs from the hardware wallet and like maybe like why your solution is better?
Hold on,
Yeah,
JW.
so actually, it's not
Hold on,
even.
JW.
I don't even like to debate my solution so much because it's the principles behind it that are way more interesting, right? Like I don't get it. I don't care if you guys use Yeti or not. I don't get paid. There is no service. There's nothing in it for me at all, right? Um, so it doesn't matter to me. But I think the like my mission really is to help people understand like why should you trust a piece of open source software? Like why does even Bitcoin work at all? Why can it work when like Microsoft Windows and like a real big name isn't behind it? It's until people grasp those fundamental principles, then I'm just kind of beating my head against the wall on this sort of stuff. So I'd rather answer your question by going through how those where we get trust from in an open source environment, and why I trust using Bitcoin Core, because Yeti is just a setup guide on top of it, right? I haven't really done anything of tremendous value there. You can do all of this stuff, and actually other people have, like Ben Westgate has a script that you can run that has nothing to do with Yeti that will do the exact same thing. It just doesn't have pretty colors. So it's all about using Bitcoin Core, really.
Hey, I really kind of, whether you guys notice, I concur with what JW says. I mean, there are a lot of businesses that have built their stuff up on storage and hardware and security for Bitcoin, but I can truthfully, personally tell you that depending on the amount of risk that you're willing to take, okay, we're not talking about complete overall foolproof security, but depending on the amount of risk that you're willing to overall take, you should not rely on one single way to secure your coins, which means you may have more than one wallet. So you may have a Trezor, you may have a Ledger,
The
you may
problem
have a
with
Cold
that
Card.
is that you increase the chance of loss, right? So the brilliance of multi-sig is you get to have your cake and eat it too, and that you decrease the chances of losing it, and you decrease the chances of it being stolen. What you're talking about is like sort of diversifying, not having all your eggs in one basket. The problem there is it increases the chances that you lose a basket or that one of the baskets gets stolen.
Yes, yes, yes. That is the risk of doing that. The other option is multi-sig. I mean, I run most of the stuff I do. I run it based off of Core. Because Core is open source. Core's got like a million eyes looking at it. So as soon as something really comes up, one of those eyes is gonna go on Reddit or go on GitHub or go on freaking Twitter, and you know. So I mean, multisig is probably most likely the best. I mean, I even I even use an open dime, you know, an open dime, and I just lock it up. So I mean, it's just a matter of there is no foolproof
So
way.
but here's the problem. Like let's talk through like OpenDime versus Bitcoin Core, and let's say that this is like your life savings. Because if it's just spending money or if it's a few grand, it's probably not that big of a deal. Like there's all kinds of things that are fine. But if it's your life savings, you don't want to put it on something like an OpenDime because you don't know what software is being run on an OpenDime. If you wanted to increase the security of your OpenDime, you would want to completely, it's a small computer is all that it is. So you'd want to erase all the software on it, download that software from like a very visible public website, and then, hopefully this is a website where other people are downloading the software and checking it all the time. And then you would install it on the OpenDime, and that would help quite a bit. But does that actually? Let's just stop there. Does that concept make sense to you guys? Like the reason that I don't like to have stuff pre-installed is I don't know what it is. Right? Some dude in a factory somewhere installed some software, which is just a set of instructions, and then I'm using that. In my mind, that's not very much different than Coinbase, right? Like if I give my keys to Coinbase, I'm trusting those guys not to steal my Bitcoin. If I take software from you guys or anybody that's been pre-installed and I don't know what that software is because I didn't put it on there and I have no way to check what's on there, how is that different? Like I'm trusting the guy that put the software on there that's now securing my keys just as much as I'm trusting the Coinbase folks.
Yeah, but most of these
Absolutely.
most of these people can't. Most people can't verify the code anyway. Most people will have no clue or idea what they're doing.
No, that's not
I mean,
true.
they could
That's
get
not true at
trained.
all. Look at so the way that you do it. I mean, that's a good pushback. So let me respond to that. This is what I tell normal people to do. I tell them that what you need to do is you need to take a laptop and you need to completely erase it, and that's not hard. Anybody can do that. I mean, I've walked many boomers through this at this point. It's none of it. It's like math, right? None of it's hard. It's just one step at a time. If the instructions are clear, anybody can follow steps, right? So you erase whatever device you have, you erase it. And then you need to install some software. So you go to a website that's very popular, like Ubuntu.org, and you download the software from there. And then you grab signatures. So a lot of popular people have looked at the code and they've said this is safe, and then they've signed the software. So what that does, it allows you to pull the software from someplace that's public, which is a huge help, because if me as an attacker, if I want to screw you over and I get to pre-install your software, then I can just target you, right? And there's no way for you to even tell anybody that I screwed you. Like you can't take the code that's running on that machine, pull it off, and then publish it, and everybody goes, "Oh, JW is a bastard. He sent somebody bad code." But if it's up on a website, people can download it all the time and check it, right? And so if me as an attacker, if I want to screw you over, I need to like kind of know when you're going to pull that code down, or like know where you're connecting from or something, and try to put something bad in there so that you download it and then switch over to the good thing again before all the good guys download the bad thing and then alert you to it, right? So even just downloading it from a very public website before you install it is a huge improvement over having anybody else install the software for you. But then you can take it to another level by by verifying that what you downloaded is something that a lot of other folks have looked at. And that's not very hard to do. It's just copying and pasting a command, and that command will check the signatures for you. So this is not hard. I mean, what I just walked you guys through is maybe 15 minutes worth of work, which is not worth it for $1,500. I wouldn't do it, right? For $1,500, I use Blue Wallet. It's a complete great user experience, but it's totally inappropriate for my life savings. Does that sound like too hard to you guys or is it unclear that that's worthwhile to anybody?
No, it doesn't sound too hard, but is there a guide for this? Because I have looked on YouTube, I have looked in places. Is there some kind of guide that breaks this down? Because I haven't seen anything like that.
Well, that's what YetiCold.com is. It's a guide that I worked on with my son and a few other folks. Ben Westgate has also published a guide, and it's not Yeti Cold. It's not Yeti code at all, right? Like, I didn't have anything to do with this, and that will walk you through it. And actually, there's a couple other folks that have published stuff that will walk you through it. I just can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, the one that I recommend is YetiCold.com, because I put a lot of time into making it look pretty and be simple, but yeah, there's definitely other guides. So you can just hit Ben Westgate up on Twitter and ask him for his guide, and ask him. I think he goes by A. Ask him for A's guide, and then you'll have 3 completely independent guides, 2 of which have nothing to do with me. So yeah, I can be slandered all day long, and you'll still be able to do this. It's not hard.
And
Yeah,
then
is it code or cool?
Cold, YetiCold.com is my thing.
yeah, and then good vibes. Just a heads up. So you can do all this. Everything that he's saying is totally appropriate. Running core is, the backbone of the Bitcoin network. So absolutely. I'm just going to provide an alternative as well, because again, it's just sort of like ingrained in our industry that there are alternative options. Hardware options do exist. Ledger, Trezor, Cold Card, all options that are hardware wallets that are specifically built to store your keys. Each one offers different, trust models, different security best practices. Again, JW, please.
Why this is a bad idea. So if you're going to throw those out there, at least interact with the argument and say like,
I'm
overstating the concern.
No, I think that in this industry, there's a lot of people,
dude, you're like
especially
a guy that's like Monero exists, Litecoin exists.
But
at least do me the decency of saying Litecoin exists and it's better than Bitcoin in this way.
So
right? Announcing shitcoins again and again is not helpful.
I am providing alternative options based on your feedback, and I am saying that using a ledger is a totally applicable and appropriate way to store your funds, and you don't need to be buying because it offers an appropriate enough security model for storing your Bitcoin.
You should not install the software, have somebody else do it, right?
That's a fair perspective.
So interact with that. Just say.
So I have no problems with using, for example, a Trezor whose code is open sourced, And I agree with you in
But
regards
you didn't
to the
install it, so you
randomness.
don't know what it is.
I understand that, but most of us are not, we are not coders.
Nope, it's not hard. It's not hard.
That's fine. But also, I have all my funds on a computer that's sitting underneath my desk or something like that. It doesn't
Nope, didn't
scream to
suggest
me.
that. Stop straw manning me. Interact with the arguments and be specific. What about having somebody else install the software for you is okay?
I am okay with trusting code that has been reviewed by others in Trezor's
You didn't install
circumstance.
it. Somebody else installed the code, dude. You don't know that code that's installed by somebody else is the code that you see on the website.
So again, differencing of opinions, but at
that's
times
not a matter of opinion.
It's all right, man. Hey, so listen, look, we're gonna move
just
on.
Interact with the argument.
We're gonna move
on.
I'm
gonna have to agree with JW here. I do have some limited software engineering experience, and I think that you're absolutely right. We don't know who installed the software. And I'll admit, most of my funds are on a Trezor, so I'm actually going to be reviewing my OPSEC now.
And I'm not even saying that I'm right. I'm just saying, do me the decency of let's have a specific conversation. If you think it's cool to have somebody else install the software, just say, I don't think it's that risky. And then I can say, I do think it's risky and why. And you can say, I don't think it's risky and why. But what's not cool is for me to explain why something's a bad idea. And then for you just this is exactly like what it was 4 years ago when I was explaining to people why Monero and Litecoin were a bad idea. I would be a decent human being. I would explain it in detail. And then some guy would be like, well, it's just important that everybody in the room knows that Monero exists in case they need it. And it's not okay to do that. You're just you're taking advantage of people instead of having an honest conversation.
Everybody's got their experience level. Everybody has their background and their perspective on things, and
that exact same argument is what shitcoiners do.
Yeah, okay, whatever, man.
Don't just keep throwing blankets on it.
We have different scene of opinions. We have a different scene of opinions.
What is your opinion,
bro? We're gonna move on. We're gonna move on.
Yeah.
Hold on here, Hal. Okay, because I mean, I've been doing this for a couple of years, and I can tell you all of the experiences that people have had. I mean, you have not had this experience, but I've had friends and family who, they didn't get their Trezor or Ledger directly from the website. They saw it in a store. Somehow they wound up in a store and they wound up buying it at a store. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm getting this call, hey, I lost $500. And they're like, well, I thought that Trezor or Ledger or whoever, these places, they're reputable. And once I find into the details and stuff, I find, well, why did you buy it at a store? And they're like, well, because it was at the store and, that's what people were talking about. But, I mean, you have to... I mean, there are
exactly.
Some dangerous.
That's totally
people.
Different. We can have conversations and go in all kinds of different ways, right? And what he's saying is actually something that we can all interact with and go, all right, what exactly is the trust model here? Why do we trust these things that we buy off the shelf? And so
I don't know.
I don't care if we all have differing opinions, but we'll all be better off if we actually interact with each other's arguments.
I mean, JW, I don't really, I'm not like the total security guy. I've done the code for core. I've the C++ and all this stuff. I'm not like the total complete security guy. So I'm not really the one. I'm just saying that for myself.
No, I'm saying that what you're doing
like
right now is totally different, right? It's legit. I'm agreeing that what you're doing is different than what the host is trying to do. You're actually saying, all right, let's have a conversation and talk through the pros and cons of this rather than just papering over, agree to disagree. There's lots of different shitcoins or security products in the world. So, I mean, that's interesting, right? So let me ask Hal, what is the solution to that problem that he's talking about? He has friends that lost money. How should that happen differently?
So I guess I missed the part where he said his friends lost money. They said they bought a hardware wallet off the shelf at a store, and then they lost funds. Yield farming? Are you saying that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
and then did they? I think the main reason a lot of people lose funds based on hardware wallets that they bought is that they get scammed into thinking that a pre-filled out seed phrase is their seed phrase, and then they load funds onto that seed phrase. That I have yet to hear any experience of anybody losing funds that off of a hardware wallet that had not been taken advantage of in that way where the seed phrase was pre-filled out.
well, as I'm saying, man, I'm
Do
not
you
the
know,
security guy.
actually,
I'm
Yield,
not
do
the
you know
security
if
guy.
that's what happened? Because that, I mean, this is like a worthwhile case study to talk through. Do you know if that was the pre-filled out seed file or if it was something else? And it's okay
All
if you don't even know.
all that I was told was, and this is not just one person. This is several people. All that I was told was that they went to go check their hardware device, and their funds were gone.
Yeah, I think a good
Yeah.
question would ask before we can even hypothesize on what happened is like there's a general scam practice in the space where you're people that don't know what they're doing either buy a device that they took out the empty seed phrase card, they put in one that has the seed phrase pre-printed on it, and they load their funds onto a private key that somebody else controls, and as soon as they load it, they obviously wipe the funds and move on. So I and JW, please correct me
No,
if
that's
I'm
legit,
wrong.
man.
Yeah,
No,
but
that's
no,
actually,
but please let me
yeah.
know if I'm missing something because I am trying to be fair here. And I'm just this is called a Bitcoin pleb chat for a reason, right? I'm just a pleb. I've been around the space for a while, but I don't pretend to know everything. I just know that there's a difference in people's
Yeah.
capabilities, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I know
totally.
tons of people that have lost money because they make things too difficult on themselves. And I'm not saying that your solution is difficult. I'm just
No, that's a
I
fair
guess
criticism, man. So
okay,
let's
so
just
what I
all I'm saying is let's do this, right?
uh,
Let's be plebs because none of us are geniuses, and let's just walk through all of the different scenarios. And I'm not going to ask you guys to trust me based on authority. I'm just going to make an argument, right? And anybody can make an argument. You have made decisions about what you're doing with your life savings. You've put thought into it, and it's okay if I say something like, "Dude, you didn't install the software," and you go, "Yeah, that's weird. Didn't really hit me how stupid that is until now. I got to give that some thought." And then we can move on to another part of the argument, right? Like it's okay to lose parts of the argument and then just move on because it is a very multifaceted sort of thing.
so and I guess okay, so and I'm totally willing to have that conversation. So listen, okay, so I agree with you in regards to a ledger, right? Like they have closed source and open source software on the device and hardware. The Trezor, if I'm not mistaken, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, everything's pre-installed, but their source code it's open. Is that correct? Am I being accurate here?
So yeah, yeah. So that's great, man. I really appreciate you kind of engaging like this because honestly, I've been busting your chops, but the reason that this is so heated is that there's a lot of people that don't financially benefit from us just like sitting around shooting the shit and just talking through the pros and cons of all this stuff. There's a lot of people making money on it. It's just like with the shit coins, and I could be wrong. Like I could have been wrong 4 years ago with Litecoin and Monero and all that sort of stuff, right? And I could be wrong on this stuff because it's even more subtle. That stuff is actually, relatively speaking, way easier to see through. But we all benefit if we get specific, right? Rather than just being like, oh, JW has a product or a service or he's mad at this guy or whatever. Um, Going down to the level of detail where all of that stuff disappears and we're just like, well, this is interesting. Like, how do we know that we trust or how do we deal with the fact that people have pulled things off the shelf and the seed phrase is written down or software is pre-installed? So on the software pre-installed thing, I feel like I've kind of beat a dead horse there because we got wrapped around the axle. But bottom line is, it doesn't matter if it's open source or not because you don't know what's on it, right? Like if I say, hey, this beef is FDA approved and tested and whatever, but it doesn't have the label on it anymore or whatever packaging it is that kind of ties you back into the supply chain. It does, like, you have no idea what you have. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, there's code up on a website that is or is not open source. Let's say it's open source and it's been reviewed. There's no way for you to know that the code that you're running on your phone right now or your Trezor or whatever is that same code unless you were the one that downloaded it and installed it.
Hey, can I just give a kind of an analogy to what you're saying, JW?
Yeah, go for it. And I think we should stick.
Yeah, so
let's make sure
like
we totally get this, because this is worthwhile. This is so fundamental and foundational that once you get this, you can eliminate a lot of the other things that are more complicated.
okay, so when I'm busy, I'll pay somebody else to change my oil. But when they hand me the keys, first thing I do is I go pop that hood and I check it right in front of them, and it pisses them off. But why? Because I don't know if that's a lube tech that checked or did my oil, and it's his first day on the job, or maybe he was out back smoking a joint or whatever. I don't know. I don't trust it. I'm going to check it right in front of him. Verification.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way for you to pop the hood on your computer and check the code that's being run. So you either need to install the oil yourself, install the software yourself. Like if you go into Walmart and you grab oil off the shelf, that's sort of like downloading software from a really popular website. Because if Walmart started selling shitty oil, you'd probably hear about it before it would hit you, right? You have like the herd immunity sort of thing, because other people are going in and buying oil from that location. And then you pour the oil yourself into your car, you can be pretty sure that that's decent quality oil, right? Because the crowd has protected you and you've controlled, basically the crowd protects you up to the point that it's on the shelf. And then from being on the shelf into your car, you know that you did it yourself. So you're relatively secure. So that's a great analogy, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
And another way to
JW.
look at that real quick, one last way to look at that, just to kind of amplify what you're saying, is that what else in this world is trustless like Bitcoin? We have to have ways to verify things.
Yeah, free and open source software is definitely a big deal, and the only way that we make this work. So,
Hey, JW, can I say something about?
Question on the Trezor piece. So we're saying that the Trezor code is open source, but we don't know if the open source code is the actual code that is on the Trezor when you receive it.
yeah,
Because
There's trust there, right? I agree with JW. There's trust there, but you can't eliminate all trust in everything. There's trade-offs. So you can in a lot of things, but I think that hardware wallets, even though you're trusting them that you're getting a genuine product and you're having the correct open source software put on there, I think that's a good trade-off for the masses. We're not going to go to extreme.
I mean, if it's it is all relative, man. I mean, that's a good pushback.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So if it's for if you're going to put $500 on it, or you just want to have something that's cool and it has a fun user experience, totally. But
not okay for 1,000 Bitcoin or something. You got to do something better than that.
Yeah, if it's for your life. So let's talk through this trade-off, right? So because even with like this specific trade-off, you can still use a Trezor, and I'm really trying to go deep. That way, it's not like, oh, I'm just shitting on Trezor or whatever. So because this applies to all of the different hardware wallets, it applies to my solution, it applies to everything, right? So it's very foundational that when you install software, you want to get it from a very public source, and then you want to install it yourself. And you can fix this particular problem. But there's a lot of them, right? There's 50 things like this that are foundational that I want to help try to get out into the community, get people to think about. And if you do all of this, you're probably not going to sell as many. Like once people understand all this, I don't think hardware wallets are going to sell as well, which is why there's so much pushback. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just like super cynical. So if you want to fix this problem, what you do is you don't have to get rid of your Trezor. You just have to make sure that when you receive the Trezor, you flash the firmware on it, you erase the Trezor, then you download the Trezor code from, a fairly, Trezor.com or whatever, and then you install it. And so that would be the way to mitigate that. And
That's
I'm
pretty
not
reasonable.
actually suggesting that anybody does that, because I think, like I said, there's 50 other things, and it really kind of ruins the user experience if you do all of the right things here. But if it's your life savings, that's a huge risk. You can get rid of it for 15, 20 minutes of work. you absolutely should do that step and the other things that we'll talk about.
Take responsibility and do it.
There's also reproducible builds on Cold Card as well, correct? So you'd be able to do the exact same thing as you were mentioning about Trezor, but on a Cold Card.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it with anything. Like, I'm not like reproducible builds are interesting and maybe a little bit useful, but I'm just saying, like, super basic open source. Like, the only reason that open source software exists and works in the world is these sort of trust links, right? The first link is that the code is visible so everybody can see it and it's in a very public place, right? So, and maybe Ledger doesn't do that. I'm not sure. I don't think it practically matters, but because of other things, but at the end of the day, like, let's keep it generic enough to where you guys can actually walk away with like a tool that will save your ass in a bunch of different situations. So it's got to be very public. The code has to be very public. And then there has to be a way to get it off the shelf at Walmart, right? Where it's in this very public website into your machine. And the way to do that is to download it. And then on top of that, if you can go a lot further by taking popular folks that have a reputation and have said, I looked at this code, it is the same code that's up here, it's trustworthy, and I sign it. And there's software that you can use that makes it super easy to do that. So again, you download the code from a very public place, you install the software yourself, and then you check the signatures. And if you're not doing that, and it's for a lot of money, you've done something that's like fundamentally very, very stupid.
JW, one question on the multi-sig. So I think, and I'll use Trezor as an example because I think they are 100% open source, whereas Ledger, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't believe they're 100% open source. So if you flash the Trezor, install the firmware yourself, and I think some of the newer wallets do have multi-sig. Is that, from a security perspective, comparable to what you were talking about, or are there still gaps?
Yeah, there's still gaps, but that's actually another huge step in the right direction. So let's again, it can be a Trezor, but it doesn't matter, right? Let's say you've got this signing device and you've erased it and then you've installed the software. You've got it from you've done that like very basic, like brush your teeth hygiene, right? Like,
yeah, the concern
super
with
basic.
installing, sorry to interrupt you, Jeremy, I just thought of something. The concern with installing the software and firmware yourself is at that point it's no longer air gapped, right? So you're connecting it to a computer, laptop, whatever you want to call it, in order to do that. So I would presume that could potentially be a vulnerable area in and of itself.
Yeah. So actually, that's related to what I was going to say. So one of the issues is that when you have a signing device like a Trezor or Ledger, it's not really a wallet. It's kind of the community is starting to try to use the term signing device, and I think that's helpful because a wallet is a full node. There's really not a distinction between like, and even like phone wallet, I think we need to come up with different terms there. So if you're a normal person and you hear wallet, like Bitcoin wallet, you think that it has all of the functionality necessary to send and receive Bitcoin, right? In that chunk of code. And the reality is that that's true with something like Bitcoin Core, right? Like when Satoshi wrote a wallet, he wrote a wallet that had the full capability of sending and receiving Bitcoin. But over time, these sort of commercial efforts and other efforts to make things like user-friendly and super easy have resulted in that what a normal person would think of as a wallet is being broken up. So now we sort of have the concept of like a node, and that's the thing that interacts with the Bitcoin network and tells you whether you've sent or received Bitcoin. Then we have like a signing device, which would be like a Trezor or Ledger, Cold Card, whatever, hardware wallet or Bitcoin Core, being used offline, whatever, like the thing that actually signs the transaction. And then usually there's some like middleware glue between those two things. So when you, let's say, I'll just call it I'll call it glue, glue software. So when you use a Trezor, you're actually using 3 different computers. You're using the little computer on your Trezor, you're using a laptop that is like the glue software between your Trezor and your node, and you're using Trezor's node. So Trezor is actually the one that's interacting with the Bitcoin network. Like the Trezor company that have their servers hosted wherever they're hosted, they're the ones that are sending and receiving the Bitcoin transactions for you in a very real sense, because they're the
Right.
ones that are interacting with the Bitcoin network for you. And and by breaking those things up, you can have like easier user experiences. But it also is important to know that every one of those 3 components is super high security. It's very important. So if the Trezor servers are not behaving right, you can think that you have Bitcoin that you don't have, right? Or you can accept, like, you know, in theory, you could accept Bitcoin Cash instead of Bitcoin and not know it. So it's really, really important, the role that that node plays for you. And that's why all the Bitcoin experts will say that if you want to do anything that's reasonably high secure, you have to run, you know, even reasonable privacy. You have to run your own node with your Trezor, right? So let's assume that you're following that basic hygiene, which again is not part of the default setup instructions, right? So 99.9% of people that buy a Trezor are led down the garden path to slaughter, and I do have a big problem with that. But let's assume that, like, you listen to a podcast and they said you have to run a node. You're like, oh shit, I'm glad I heard this because I was about to follow the instructions that come with the device. What you end up with is you have a computer that's your full node, and then you have your signing device, and you don't need that middleware glue anymore. But if you run that node on, like, let's just say you install Bitcoin Core to be your node on whatever laptop you have laying around your house, that's a really bad situation because whatever you have laying around your house probably has malware on it. And it's important that your node is secure. So really, you not only need to erase and install the software on your Trezor, but before you even get to that point, you need to take a laptop and you need to erase that and then go through the same process, right? So you erase your laptop, then you pull down some software from Ubuntu.org. It's very popular free open source software. It meets those basic requirements of it being a very public and lots of people code reviewing it, right? You install that and then you check the signatures on that. Then you can take your Trezor, erase that, and install the software on that. And this is a pain in the ass, right? But if it's your life savings, you don't want to pick easy. It's a pain in the ass, relatively speaking, right? Like if you've ever set up a trust offshore, I have. It costs you $10,000 a year just to maintain that stupid thing. And so and the amount of security that you get out of it is way, way overhyped, right? So what I just described, it's a pain in the ass, but it's like, you know, it's a weekend at most for the dumbest person in the audience. So if you're securing your life savings, yeah, you're gonna have to invest a weekend. I'm sorry, you can't. You know, it's just the state of the industry. So if you want to be a relatively early adopter on Bitcoin and follow this basic hygiene, it's going to take you a few hours.
But
I reckon
essentially,
I don't take much more time for a lot of people.
but
JW.
going down that route
No,
takes
it
away.
won't take more than a weekend. I've had 70-year-olds that it doesn't take more than a weekend.
Yeah, the people out there that just still would struggle. I've come across them that really struggle.
Yeah,
A weekend. I mean, we're talking about 10 hours at a computer. Yeah, that's really, really struggling. But it's
No, they'll get
not.
stuck and they won't be able to proceed on many steps. There's so many pitfalls. You'll be able to do it. You're computer expert. But
That's not fair, man. That's not fair because we have had tons of people come into the Slack, hundreds of people at this point come into the Slack, ask some very simple question. You know, I don't know how to hit F12. I can't find out, you know, this or that. They get their question answered and they move on. Rolo just tweeted out that he had some dude that's a complete non-security person get through the whole process on his own without any help. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that you might not end up asking a support question at some point in the process, but an entire weekend is a lot of time. And so I'm not overselling it, right? I'm saying it's going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to ruin one of 52 weeks a year for you when you set it up, right? It's a significant investment, but it's totally doable. And we've not seen one person so far that can't pull it off.
Yeah, and JW, this goes back to the trade-offs you were talking about, right? If we're talking about $500 or $1,000, relatively speaking, if it's not a big deal to you, then it's fine. But if you're talking about $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever, then and that's a big deal to you, then you try and go through the pain. A couple of questions at that point. So the way you articulated building your own node and then using your Trezor, that kind of takes away the whole point of why people buy a cold storage device or a hardware wallet, which is ease of use, right, or the user experience.
Yeah, but here's the thing: whether whether you run a full node or not. So I was talking earlier about the BitBlock Boom guy and his friend that reached out to me because he lost his life savings. The reason that he lost his life savings is that it wasn't that the code on the Trezor was evil. It was that the code on his laptop was evil. And it tricked him into doing something stupid that most people will do. So you can say, oh, he's stupid, he shouldn't have done that. But most people will fall for this trick. So the solution to keeping people from falling for the trick
Could you articulate what the trick was or what happened exactly?
Yeah. So, I mean, so here's the thing, like, I'll give you an analogy. Let's say that you've got your Trezor in your pocket. You feel good about it. Maybe you've even erased the software on it and installed it yourself. You're like, all right, I'm good to go. And you walk in your office at home and there's a hacker sitting at your laptop and he runs out the window, right? Like he's got like a Hacksaw t-shirt on or something. And you're like, fuck, I just had a bad guy on my laptop. If you wouldn't go, no big deal, my Trezor will keep me safe, and just plug it in and use it, then you shouldn't use the laptop that you have at home because there is a very significant chance that there's already malware on that laptop. And what that means is that a hacker has remote control of your computer. It's more than 30% likely. That's very, very on the low end. You do any Google search, like how many computers have malware on them. It's a very, very significant percentage. And it's very easy to get malware, right? I mean, look at all of the stories around all of the ransomware stuff that's going on. These people have IT departments, they have security departments, they have people that work full time to try to keep malware off laptops. They spend millions of dollars a year, and they still get malware on their laptop.
Totally understand the threat vector there.
So I'm also explaining it to the audience too, because we have kind of a range. So if you wouldn't be comfortable plugging in let me ask you, if you walked into your office, so to recap, what you're saying is the reason that people buy a Trezor is so that they can plug it into their regular daily use laptop and feel good about it. Knowing that for most people there's malware on their laptop, that a hacker has remote control of their laptop. Does that make sense to you? Would you still do that?
Sorry, no. The point I was making with the user experience part of it was to say that if I have to run my own node anyway, why would I use a Trezor with that node? Why wouldn't I just do it off the, maintain my keys off the node directly myself? Why do I need a Trezor at that point, I guess is where I was going, because it defeats the purpose of why people would buy a hardware wallet that's easy to use.
I think that's fair, and I think most people that buy a hardware wallet don't run a full node. I think I personally am cynical enough to think that the reason that the setup guide inside the Trezor doesn't say, and I've talked to the Trezor guys, I've talked to all these guys, right? So my cynicism grew over time, but my personal opinion is the reason that the instructions suck that are shipped with hardware wallets, and everybody will agree that they do, is because if they gave you good advice, they wouldn't sell as many. Now, I can't prove that, but that's my interpretation of the situation.
That's fair, JW, and I will ask this question in in the least threatening way possible. So you talked about a few guides that are out there, right? And I think you also mentioned some code that people have made available. Going back to the trust piece of it, what guarantees that you can trust the code that somebody else wrote? Or, I don't know if the Yeti cold piece is just a guide, and if it doesn't have code, I haven't looked at any of this. So I guess I'm just looking for guidance on how is this a more trustworthy approach, because at least with the hardware wallets, you're trusting an organization, which implies, mass, just from a scale perspective, adoption, and also potentially somebody you could sue.
Right. Totally.
As opposed to just doing this on your own off of a guide that somebody wrote in their kitchen or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think
totally,
you get my question. And again, I'm not insinuating anything. This is purely for my own edification.
So I like, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I wish that I had better adversaries, right? Like, I wish people would, like, people FUD me all the time and say that I'm a scammer and I'm running off with money and stuff. And it's annoying, because what I really want them to do is actually point out the ways that I could screw you. Because I can screw you if you're a Yeti user in very specific ways. And if you understood those ways, it would make people insecure about me in ways that pushes us all forward as a community, and we understand where the vulnerabilities lie, right?
Well, at least I'm glad I asked the question.
Yeah, and it's a really good question. So to try to like analogize this a little bit, what we said earlier is, if you have software that's on a very public website and then you install it yourself, and then you check signatures, the analogy would be, you go into Walmart, it's a very public place, they sell tons of motor oil, you grab the motor oil off the shelf, you pour it into your car, that's relatively safe, right? We're all pretty comfortable doing that. And then you could take it, like, to take the analogy further, maybe you do a quick chemical test on the oil, to make sure that it matches what somebody else has said it should match, right? That would be the equivalent of like verifying the signatures. That, what I just described, is way more of a pain in the ass, by the way. Like, I don't change my own oil, because if my car, my car's $70,000, if the engine blows up, it's a bad day, but it's not going to change my life, right?
I think it's safe to presume that nobody is testing the oil.
Yeah, right.
They put it in.
Well, I mean, I don't even install the oil myself. I go and have somebody else do it, and I know
Right.
that it's a jackass that I've had problems where they put too much oil in or put the wrong oil in. I still don't care, right? I'm still not going to go through this amount of work.
Sorry, just to articulate that a little bit more. Going back to the hardware wallet scenario, if you drive, I don't know, a BMW, for example, and you take it to a BMW dealership for service, then you're sort of trusting the fact that it's a BMW dealership. They know what they're doing. They do this for thousands of BMWs on a regular basis, yada yada yada, and also the opportunity to, if they messed up big time and they screw you over and mess up your car, you could sue. So I think that's the analogy.
I'm getting to that part of it. So I'm just trying to recap, like, the fundamental way that I'm telling you can trust open source software is if it's very publicly visible, and then you install it yourself, and then you test signatures. And that's like buying oil from a Walmart, and then maybe even testing the content, right? That's pretty good. And all I was saying is, like, every one of these steps is a pain in the ass. I don't do it when it comes to my car, because it's not worth it to me. And if it's $5,000 in Bitcoin, I don't even recommend you do this. But
right.
if it's your life savings, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I'll spend a weekend changing my oil if it's going to cost me everything that I've worked my whole life to earn, right? So that's the basic analogy. And the pushback for something like Yeti or anything should be, well, JW, what you're saying is, like, you've got this corner shop bodega, right? And now you're telling me that I should go buy the oil, right? Bitcoin Core is like the oil that's off the shelf, that's all trustworthy and all that, but it's kind of hard to use. And so then you should go to this little corner shop that JW runs that nobody knows, and then use this, this additive or whatever. And now, I don't know, now I'd rather be at the BMW dealer. Totally excellent criticism. The answer to that is that you should be very concerned about any open source software. Like, open source is not enough, right? So I can say, hey, I have this hardware wallet, or I have this website that has a little bit of script that helps you set this up, which is like an additive or whatever. And it's open source. That doesn't mean anything, because, well, it means something, right? Like, Casa actually ships closed source software. So that's absurd. But even if it's open source, that's not good enough. That doesn't meet
Yeah,
the bar.
and JW,
And
one thing I need to highlight here is,
let me
sorry,
finish real quick. No, it's
okay.
okay. Let me just finish this thought. So it has to be open source, right? And it has to be very popular, or the Walmart analogy breaks down, and you're back to like this, Vinny on the street corner selling you oil. So it has to be popular. It has to be open source. Yeti is not popular, so it's a very good reason not to trust that you should use that part of the software. There are ways to mitigate that, but before I tell you the solution to it, I think it is worthwhile for us all to recognize that that underlying concept, super popular and open source, eliminates everything except for Bitcoin Core.
I totally get it, and the point I was going to make when I almost interrupted you there was the number of people that have verified an open source product like an Ubuntu, for example, is very different in terms of scale. It's probably thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, as opposed to the number of people that would have verified your open source code, right? Or Yeti's open source
Yes.
code.
Yep,
and
totally.
and that's the sort of open ticket item, or the scary part of all of this to me, or I shouldn't say scary,
Yeah.
but it's the unknown factor.
Yep, exactly. So I mean, it definitely applies to Yeti, and it also applies to something like Cold Card, right? So even if you, and maybe, I mean, Cold Card is way better than Yeti on this particular point, right? Cold Card is more like, okay, it's not Walmart. JW is like the dude that like has some oil in his jacket and is like, hey man, you want some oil? And Cold Card is maybe like the corner shop, right? So Cold Card is way better than Yeti from this perspective. But either way, I think what we would all agree is like, if it's your life savings tied up in this car, you're going to the Walmart, right? You're not going to the corner shop. You're definitely not going to the dude on the corner. So then the question is, can you use Bitcoin Core easily? And the answer is, yeah, actually you can. Dude, you do not need Yeti at all to have a very, very strong setup. What you should do is you can follow my guide to install, and it's just the step-by-step guide, right? That just tells you how to reasonably install Ubuntu and then install Bitcoin Core, and then not do anything else, right? Don't use any Yeti code at all, and you'd be like a solid A, right? Like, and you can do that for absolutely free, and it will probably it'd probably cost you. I mean, you can buy a brand new laptop, and then return it when you're done. So there's no real cost there. What you would do is you would set up Bitcoin Core, you'd erase the laptop, you'd install Ubuntu, you'd install Bitcoin Core, and then you would back up your wallet.dat file on like 5 or 6 CDs. And you don't even have to do multi-sig, right? Like maybe this is an A- because you're not doing multi-sig. You can absolutely do all of that on your own. It doesn't cost you anything, and obviously nobody's getting paid to tell you how easy it is, because it's not rocket science. Anybody can get this done in 4 hours. If you are not totally comfortable with your setup, do this weekend, and I'll tell you that you're fine, right? Like, you don't need to use my shit at all, because you followed basic hygiene. You've installed the software yourself. You've pulled it from public sources, and you've only used super popular open source software. So that should really be our baseline. Beyond that, I would say the Yeti code that's like, hey man, I got this in my jacket pocket. You want some? What you do with that, because it does have utility, it makes it easy to set up multi-sig. But it's not going to be long before Bitcoin Core makes it easy to set up multi-sig, and then we're just going to put a bullet in Yeti, because that's the only reason it exists, is that there's some stuff that's hard to do natively in Bitcoin Core. But what you want to do is you want to take the stuff from me that's like kind of shady, and then you want to have it totally checked out. And it turns out that's very easy. Like, we knew about this problem and we designed for it. So we used Python, and we don't do anything security critical in the Yeti code at all. Everything important is done by Bitcoin Core. So you can take the Yeti code, you can hire a guy that's a Python developer for like $60, and he doesn't even have to be a security expert. And you just have to tell him, I want you to read this code. It's 300 lines or something, if that. And I want you to make sure that it doesn't do anything shady, and that everything security important is done by Bitcoin Core. And for $60, you'll take that thing out of JW's sweaty jacket and be totally confident that it's trustworthy.
Hey, JW, I have a few questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it. But I mean, even that is not, arguably you're better off not. I personally, like, if somebody asks me what should I do, I'm going to say use Yeti, because I know it's legit. My son and I put it together. A lot of people have reviewed the code. It's fine, right? That's what I personally use. But if you said, I'm not comfortable with that, I think I might, use a Trezor because I don't trust you, I'd be like, totally get it, 100% respect it. What I want you to do then is just use Bitcoin Core, and just use Ubuntu, have nothing to do with me, and you're still going to be totally fine.
So at that point, JW, how are you signing for transactions? So I know you talked about setting up, like backing up the .dat file, the data file, onto multiple CDs or whatever. But how are you then transacting? Like if you talked about shutting down the laptop and returning it or whatever. So
yeah.
So your node is sort of out there somewhere, but you can't access it because you don't have.
Yeah. So when we're talking about cold storage, before people started marketing and blurring the lines, which seems to be the whole concept of marketing these days, when you said cold storage, you were talking about Bitcoin that was not hot, which means it's not connected to any computer at all. It didn't mean that like it's on a computer that's in your safe. It meant like not internet connected. It meant like totally not on a microchip, right? Like totally dead. So the old way of doing this was like a paper wallet, or people would back up.
No, I get that. But if I wanted to move, so let's say I'm transacting. Okay.
None of your questions are 12-second questions. They're very good, or I'm just not very concise. So my point is, like, cold storage means that your keys are not just offline, but they're not even on a microchip. They're totally disconnected from computer networks in every conceivable way, right? So the old way of doing this was a paper wallet or a CD-ROM drive. And I actually spun my wheels on a lot of stuff until one of the Bitcoin Core developers reached out to me and he was like, dude, why don't you just use a CD? And it blew my mind because CDs are great solutions. They're pieces of plastic where you physically burn the data onto them. And so you don't have all of the problems with hardware wallets or USB sticks where you can have, you walk by a microwave and suddenly you don't have the data anymore. So to answer your question, after you're done setting up Bitcoin Core, you want it to be cold storage. So you erase the computers completely, which means it's a total pain in the ass to spend your money.
So you're saying it's so I understand if you've already, like, how are you moving your Bitcoins to your wallet then?
So with Yeti, what you end up with is CDs and paper. Sorry, let me know if the baby screaming in the background gets annoying. With Yeti, what you end up with is paper. You have your paper seed words written down, and you have CDs that have all of your descriptors and also your data on there that you need to spend. And then you erase the computers. What that means is that when it's time to spend, you have to take the data off the CDs and put it on the computers so that you can spend. So it's a pain in the butt, right? I wouldn't recommend this if you're transacting 5 times a day. But the reality is you either have like difficult to spend or secure. You don't get to have both. That's not the way God made the universe.
JW, I get the difficult to spend part, right? So that's presuming like, hey, when I'm setting up the wallet, I've got 5 Bitcoin or whatever the number is that I can push to the wallet and then erase the whole damn computer, just have the seed phrase and be able to, down the road, whenever I need access to it, pull it out. But if you've got stuff sitting on exchanges, or if you are in the process of buying stuff on exchanges over the next, I don't know, month, year, whatever, or if you are, DCAing, how do you do this on an ongoing basis where you push your sats to the wallet?
Right. Yeah. So there's a couple ways you can do it. One is you DCA for a month or 2, and then you take it all out in a lump sum so that you're not doing lots of transactions. If you had $1 million in cold storage and you were putting $1,000 a month into it, that's what I would recommend, because anytime you're accessing your Bitcoin at all, it's more likely that you could get it stolen, right? I'm not saying it's not safe, but the less you touch it, the better, right? So that's what I would do. I would probably DCA, I'd get $6,000 together. Then this is what I would personally do. I'd get $6,000 together on the exchange. Then I'd run down, grab my CDs, take a few hours, get my wallet reset up, and then make a deposit. That's the most secure way to answer your question.
So, but every time you're
Alternatively,
doing
though,
that, sorry
you can
to interrupt. Just a question there. Every time you're doing that, don't you need to have that isn't it ideal to use the same laptop that you set up the node on? Because if you're not using it for anything else, then at least you know that potential for malware or anything else is highly reduced.
Not really. I mean, the laptops that we're talking about, you can get for $125 at Walmart, maybe $150. So it's fine, for somebody that's doing significant amounts of Bitcoin and they need to put it in there, on a regular basis. I would say, yeah, just buy a dedicated laptop and erase it when you're done. But that said, if it was your daily driver laptop, it's fine because you're thoroughly erasing it. There are ways that you could get into problems, but they're like super esoteric and not practical. So I'm very comfortable just taking my daily driver laptop, erasing it, and then reinstalling the OS and using it for some Bitcoin stuff.
JW,
Yeah.
JW, why wouldn't you just say have 20 addresses ready when you first make your wallet so that you don't have to keep running to your CDs?
That's a great solution too, actually. What I was going to suggest, what I would personally do, because I'm a paranoid, is I would just leave it on the exchange and then every 6 months pull it off, right? Because assuming your stash is much bigger than the amount that you're adding, that's the way I would approach it. But what you just said is a great solution too, where you could just print out 20 addresses and then keep them in a safe, and then once a month grab one of those addresses, scan the QR code and from the exchange and go in.
Yeah,
The other
you could
thing
also have a less convenient. I mean, you could also have a less secure wallet that's convenient to spend from, where you keep 1 or 2% of your Bitcoin, and every now and then you siphon it off to your super secure storage. That way, totally. If you ever need to spend, you just do it from your little wallet.
No, that's a great point. I think I was going to bring that up as a potential, because then you could use Exodus or whatever and have a hot wallet. So you're not still leaving stuff on exchanges, and you can collect it there, or even use a Trezor and you can sort of collect some there before you move it onto your main wallet, so to speak.
Yeah, the other thing that you can do, and I have done this when I had some stuff going on with the kids, is I just left the watch only wallet going. So you can scan what's called your descriptor in Bitcoin Core, and you guys don't have to always know all these terms and everything, because if you're using any decent software, it'll walk you through the process. But if you scan your descriptor, that's basically just your public keys. It doesn't have any of your private keys, and that will allow you to watch your Bitcoin balance and then also make deposits. The downside there is you still want to erase the laptop and get it clean, because if there's malware, then you'll make deposits to the wrong place. But in a watch only wallet, you can't spend. So what's nice is that, like, once you get out of the realm, like, I have to be a super dogmatic weirdo when it comes to your life savings in cold storage, right? You have to follow basic hygiene. You absolutely have to install your own software, and it needs to be very popular software. But when you get outside of that, like, there's a billion very reasonable ways that you can solve problems and make different trade-offs when it's for smaller amounts of money. That, because at the end of the day, if you lose it, it doesn't change your life. So you don't want to put too much work into keeping it safe.
Just to piggyback on that though too, like, I mean, I don't know if you'd agree or not that, like, installing the code from scratch after wiping a cold card, for example, as you were mentioning, they would be like the cornerstone analogy versus the Walmart analogy of Bitcoin QT. Would you agree or disagree with the fact that that is a potentially easier or just as easy solution as starting from scratch and installing Ubuntu on a on a computer?
Well, you still have to do that first step, right? Because if you use your malware infected laptop to erase your cold card and then install the software there, then it's possible that you actually just made the situation worse. So you got to start with a reasonable foundation. And, there is a certain amount of like, you never get back to like, the first two atoms that tap together, right? So you're gonna grab some laptop and then you're gonna have to download Ubuntu, and so, there's always going to be a little bit of risk in anything that you do, but you want to get to a place where you have a reasonable laptop before you start doing anything else. And that means erasing it and installing something like Ubuntu. Even if you install Windows from scratch, or Mac OS from scratch, that's still way, way better than using something that you have every reason to believe is controlled by a hacker, right? Like, when you're working with Bitcoin, don't use any devices that you have every reason to believe is controlled by a hacker.
Sorry, JW, just go back for 1 second. You mentioned the Mac OS. So if you've got an Apple and you just do a factory reset, we've called a factory reset, right? Or you're saying that will suffice?
No, I mean, if you're asking me for what I do, I don't do that. I use the most popular open source software that I can get my hands on, which is Ubuntu. It's not any harder than installing Windows or Mac OS. So I don't know why you would do it. It's
Right.
not what I would recommend. But like, if you install Windows Fresh or Mac OS Fresh, I would say it's very unlikely that you have malware on your laptop. If you don't do that, it's very likely you do have malware on your laptop. So it's a huge night and day difference. The difference between
I hear you, and though I can speak some tech. I haven't written a day of code in my life, so for some of the people that are shy of all the tech stuff, that could be potentially an option, I suppose. Maybe might not give you the same 100% security, but close. Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's 99% of the way there. So if somebody said, "Oh, I'm just not willing to install Ubuntu," but honestly, it's not any harder to install Ubuntu. In a lot of ways, like Microsoft has done kind of the same game, right? They've fudded open source software and said, "Oh yeah, if you're a genius," and that was true. Like 15 years ago, if you wanted to install Ubuntu or some Linux distro, it was you weren't gonna be able to do it if you were just a grandma. But now it's absolutely exactly the same as installing any other operating system. Like you just click next, man. Like the defaults are all
Hey,
fine.
JW. So
Yeah.
let's say I get a brand new MacBook, and I want to just to install Ubuntu. How are we going to be able to do that? I mean, we're not talking about using a virtual box or anything like that, right? We're talking about just a fresh Ubuntu OS.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do that for a couple of reasons. It's possible, and if you really wanted to, I can tell you how to do it. But one is that the Mac hardware is really expensive, right? Like you're going to spend $1,000 to buy. I don't even know if they have $1,000 laptop anymore, but there's no reason to spend that much money. You're not getting any better security than the $150, big clunky laptop that has like a plastic hinge, right? Because you're not using, you may be even returning it to the store when you're done. So what do you care, right? So there's no advantage to using Mac software, and there's extra steps involved in installing Ubuntu on a Mac. So I wouldn't bother.
So most these days, right? All these laptops, they don't really come with a CD or anything, right? Once you get it, how are you gonna install Ubuntu?
What you do is you take a USB stick, it's like $2, you throw it in, and you go out to ubuntu.org and it walks you through it, and you download the Ubuntu software and throw it on the USB stick. And then you power off your computer, power it back on, and it'll read from the USB stick, and then you erase your laptop, install Ubuntu, and you're solid. And that whole process might sound confusing, but it's like, I don't know, 30 minutes and you're good to go.
Hey, JW. This might be very esoteric, but could the hardware be compromised? Any of the laptops you purchase, not the software?
Yeah, totally. So that's why you want to What you don't want to do is you don't want to post on Craigslist, hey, I'm looking for a cheap laptop to store my life savings in Bitcoin. Can somebody please send it to me? That would be kind of analogous to buying a hardware wallet in my mind, because the reason that that is like just obviously terrifying when you put it in those terms is that the person that's selling you the hardware knows that you intend to put a significant amount of Bitcoin on it. So why would you do that, right? You're setting yourself up for pain. What you
But
want to do is you want to go buy a laptop I would buy, like, personally, this is my thought process. I want to buy the most popular laptop that is in existence, right? I walk into a Walmart, I'm like, these fools move a lot of hardware. What's kind of the low end mid range device? It's an HP. Perfect. I would never buy that for professional use, but I know they sell a ton of them. And if I was a hacker, it would be the absolute worst thing on the planet for me to target as far as trying to screw you guys. So that's the one that I buy.
just to add some paranoia, but the person who would attack the hardware would be more of a nation state, I would believe.
Not necessarily. I mean, something that the host Hall, is it Hal? Oh, there's a little A in there. That makes sense now. I'm like, I know that. I know that icon. So what Hal was saying earlier about most people that get screwed buying Bitcoin storage devices, they get screwed because you just swap out the instructions, and the instructions have a seed word that you use instead of it generating one randomly. The reason that has been and Greg Maxwell actually talks about that. If you go to yeticold.com and like go through our documentation, we have links to all this stuff. And Greg Maxwell, who wrote Taproot, does not recommend hardware wallets for noobs, thinks it's a terrible idea, and goes into quite a bit of detail and back and forth on this Reddit post. So if anybody wants to make sure it's not just JW here, that's a great resource. But he actually addresses this thing that Hal's talking about, and he says the only reason in his mind, and I agree with this, that you haven't seen more sophisticated attacks to the hardware, right? So what we're talking about here is like, you buy this physical device. It doesn't matter whether it's any computer, right? Whether it's a hardware wallet or a laptop or whatever, right? You buy this computer, you erase the software, but there's still a layer below that software that you can erase that's like, we'll just call it hardware for simplicity, right? So somebody could actually replace the chips on your computer, and now you have malicious chips. It's obviously much more complicated. Like if I saw a post on Craigslist, hey, can somebody sell me a laptop that will be good to put my life savings on it? If I'm evil, I would probably take the time to throw malware on there before I send it to him. But actually removing computer chips and putting malicious computer chips on there, like, that's a lot of work. I'd have to be pretty sure this dude had money before I would go to that much trouble. And that's if I knew that guy was going to use it for Bitcoin storage. So Greg Maxwell's point is, we will absolutely see that happen where people put malicious chips on a cold card, a Trezor, Ledger, or whatever, because it's so cost effective to do that, because you know that the end user is going to use it for Bitcoin. But we haven't seen it yet because it's just so easy to just swap out the instructions. Why would we even bother? Because we know that 99.9% of the end users are going to follow instructions. They're not going to run a full node, and they're going to use whatever instructions are in there. So we just swap those out. And you don't even have to do that great of a job. Like, a lot of these are like, they're handwritten, but a huge percentage of people are going to be like, well, I bought this thing. I trust the people that sold it to me, and so I'm going to follow the directions. So that's a long way of saying, like, it is very cost effective to attack the hardware if you know that the end user is going to store Bitcoin on it. We haven't seen it yet because it's not, there's easier ways to attack those people with instructions or just putting bad software on there. But the only defense to that is to buy the most popular hardware possible that's not used for Bitcoin, because then the attacker has to attack everybody and replace microchips on everything. And that gives us two things. One, their cost goes way up. You know, people are buying these laptops for, like, you know, their 11th grader to go to school, and they've spent $2 or $3 or $20 or $30 in labor and effort to replace the chips on that thing. So that's not good from an attacker standpoint, which means it's good for you. And the second point is, the more they do that, the more likely it is that they get discovered. And so that, again, shortens the window where they're going to be able to screw people and makes the attack not cost effective. But the solution is another way that people talk about this is a supply chain attack. So the solution to supply chain attacks are to buy the most popular hardware that's not used for Bitcoin.
JW, just one point I'd put out there is, I don't know if you've looked at any of the newer versions of the hardware wallets, but I believe at least the Trezor, and I'm in that phase where I'm just doing some homework. I believe the new Trezors, they don't come with a sheet where you have your passphrase, if you will, or your 12-word phrase written. It's generated by the device itself. So the device has got a screen, and the passphrase is generated randomly by the device, and you have to write them down.
Yeah, I think that's an improvement, but it doesn't really address the problem, because if you buy a Trezor,
the other problems that we discussed, it doesn't address, right? But if you flash it, install it yourself from a
no, the point is you can't trust the instructions that come in the box, right? So if the instructions are improved that come in the box, that's great, but the whole point is that a bad guy is going to swap out those instructions entirely. So the better solution is to pull your instructions again from like a very popular website where everybody else can call bullshit.
Yeah, or from their own website, right? Trezor.io, if you will, to walk through that. Yeah. And the other piece is, I believe the newer devices also allow for multi-sig. So again, for those that are not paranoid and are comfortable with 95% or 96% security, these might be some options.
So I mean, I'm trying to keep it as educational as possible and make the point. But that said, like, if you guys are determined to use a hardware wallet for if it's for a small amount of money, I don't care what you do. If you're determined for some reason to use a hardware wallet and not install the software yourself, get a Jade by Blockstream. I believe they're the cheapest ones that are out there right now, and they're better in every way than the other ones. They still have major problems, like some of the things that we talked about. But one of the things that's different about the Jade is that you can buy a generic hardware device. It's this little Internet of Things chip. You can buy it. It's used in millions of other things that have nothing to do with Bitcoin. You buy it for $6, and then you can install the Jade software on it, and you've got a hardware device that is cool, or whatever's wrong with your brain that I can't fix. You're still way better off than anything else. And if you don't want to install the software yourself, at least you're buying a piece of hardware from a company that is making a path for you to do these reasonable things, right? And that should give them some more credibility over all these other guys that do this gimmicky stuff that nobody can actually verify, right? Like, so they still have what I'm saying is, like, the other guys have done really shady stuff. Blockstream is the only hardware wallet maker right now that has not done anything shady. Like, if you give me any name, I can find you either issues that they refuse to tell their users about. In fact, Robert Spriegler wrote like a 40-page doc on the history of hardware wallets and all the shady shit that they've done. And there's a lot. Like, any of the major manufacturers have done some really, really questionable stuff that should have completely ruined their reputation. Every single one of them, except for Blockstream and except for Jade. And so if you're going to get a hardware wallet, get that. And it also works with your phone. So you can get a cheap phone. If you want to use a Jade, get a new cheap phone, erase it. Everybody knows how to do a factory reset on their phone. It takes like 2 minutes. Use that with your Jade, and you've got like a B- as far as security goes.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, JW. And also, my intention isn't that we're hell bent on on using a hardware wallet. I just wanted to highlight some of the recent developments, or some of the updates that I guess some of these wallet manufacturers have made to beat supply chain problems that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they don't address the supply chain problems in any meaningful way. Part of the reason that I've grown to disdain these guys is that, like, legitimate people will say, hey, this is a concern, and then they'll come up with a fix, and that fix doesn't address the concern, but it obfuscates the concern so that users end up buying and using stuff that they wouldn't otherwise. So this is the normal pattern with these guys, right? Instead of saying, hey, from now on you're going to install like this would be the solution for Trezor. If they don't want to be assholes, what they should do is they should say, we're not going to ship, we'll ship you this piece of hardware, but we're not going to pre-install the software for you. And it's not that big of a deal because when you get it, it's the only instruction is going to say go to Trezor.io and then follow the instructions. And then people like me and everybody else can keep an eye on Trezor.io, and we've eliminated a lot of these things, right? It's still possible for somebody to get a Trezor that has instructions that are bad, but it's more likely that they're gonna hear that you're just supposed to go to Trezor.io, right? And there's no
Right.
reason not to do that.
Yeah, no, I hear
Except,
you
and
100%.
this is a big except, it adds 5 more minutes to the setup process, and they're competing with other people that are trying to remove 5 minutes from the setup process, and it's going to probably increase support requests by some percentage, and so they're not going to do it. They're going to come up with some other bullshit that makes it seem like they've solved the problem without actually making any meaningful impact on it. So I hate them, but I try to hide that and keep it educational. What's up, man?
Yeah, JW. If assuming they don't change anything else, they don't change anything. What is it that the hardware wallet manufacturer?
Hey guys, I got to jump off. I just wanted to say thanks, JW. Very informative, and thanks, Hal, for hosting.
Okay, thank you. Assuming they don't change anything, assuming they do everything the same way, what is it if the hardware wallet manufacturers and retailers, if they want it to be what's the word, ethical, what disclaimer should they say to people who are interested in buying a hardware wallet? What warnings or anything should they say, assuming that, say, I'm selling a hardware wallet, but I don't want to be shady and say, yeah, if you're a new user, just use this. It's going to solve all your problems. You don't have to worry about anything. What is it that I need to warn potential buyers about so that I can try to be as ethical as possible while still selling a hardware wallet?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. So all the new hardware wallet guys, they've all reached out to me at some point and asked that question. Like, what do we need to do to appease, JW and anybody else like Peter Todd and Giacomo and Greg Maxwell that's going to shit on our product before we launch? And this includes the Foundation Devices guy. It includes Unchained Capital before they launched. I mean, I've spent hours with these people, just free consulting, to try to help them ship something that's not shit so that I don't have to tell everybody that it's shit. And the number one thing that they could do that would eliminate, and this has been my advice to all of them, it'll eliminate almost all my criticism, is you say, look, what we're selling you is appropriate for up to, like, I wouldn't be comfortable with $50,000 on one of these things, right? Like, I wouldn't be comfortable with $50,000 on a Jade in the scenario that I just described, right? But I have a lot more than $50,000, and I don't want to. And I'm a security person, right? So whatever. But if they said, look, if you're storing more than $50,000 US in this hardware wallet, you should take these additional steps, right? You should run a full node. You should make sure that you've installed the software yourself, and you should probably use generic hardware, right? So there's a point where, and the Blockstream guys have been really good about this, saying like, look, it's better if you don't buy the hardware from us because we can fuck you. So buy the hardware generically and then install it from the public website, and it's $6 instead of $40, and you've eliminated the possibility of us being able to screw you. I don't even think that they need to take it quite that far, but if they just said this, even if they said, look, if you're storing more than $50,000 on this thing, it wasn't really designed for that. That's going to eliminate about 2% of their target market, right? Because people that have a lot more than 50,000 in Bitcoin, they reach out to people like me, and I tell them, fuck no, do not use a hardware wallet. And then they look at Greg Maxwell's post, and then they don't use a hardware wallet, right? So they're not really losing out on fucking everybody else that screws up and takes their advice, because the audience to sell to there that they actually close the deal with is super tiny. Most people have a lot less than 50 grand and always will, right? Like all the new hodlers, people that are coming in now, they're not buying a whole Bitcoin, right? They're buying a hardware wallet for $100, and then they maybe have $800 in Bitcoin. So it's really just short-sighted and kind of just a dumb dick move not to tell people,
Yeah,
hey,
well,
you know,
that's
this car is not really appropriate if you have 22 kids. It's made for 4. You know, that's all we're asking.
I mean, that sounds very reasonable, and they could still make money. They don't have to close down their business. They could still sell it. They just have to say, hey, if you have more than a Bitcoin or two, look into some other solutions. This is only for say up to $50,000 or so. I don't. And again, most people don't have that much, but I wonder why they don't do that. I think it's just because they don't want to say anything that could lead anybody to believe that there's anything wrong with the hardware wallet. So by saying that,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, man. I mean, part of like my professional goal in Bitcoin is to create enough knowledge out there to where we get to the point where the hardware wallet people at least start acknowledging some of these weaknesses, because right now there's so much ignorance that if they even mention the possibility that they're not like the most secure thing in the world, it'll decrease sales. But as people get more knowledgeable and more people on Twitter join me in shitting on them for giving bad advice, having a terrible default setup, and giving people the impression it's totally appropriate for their life savings, at some point we'll see one of them jump ship. And it's like a cartel, right? As soon as one of them starts being honest and saying, look, this is not appropriate for more than 50,000, then I think the cyber hornets will swarm on everybody else a little bit, and then they'll all
Can I
get
run?
appropriate.
Can I run something by you? Let's say I'm selling hardware wallets, and I have hardware wallets from different companies, and I say, look, these are don't use one of these if you're storing more than a Bitcoin, because you probably need a more generic solution. Use Core, use Yeti. But let's say, what if I say, you're better off doing multi-sig, and you can use more than one hardware wallet from more than one company. Wouldn't that solve a lot of the problems that you are concerned about? Like if any one of these guys is compromised, and you only have a 2 of 3, and say one of the hardware wallets and from 3 different companies, wouldn't that be better for say a larger amount than 50,000? Or do you think that that's all just a waste of time and that's just security theater?
No. I mean, big picture. I mean, if I had to like make a very binary statement, I would say it's security theater. But the reality is that there is like a menu of things, right? There, like with any security product, like you don't want to spend more securing the thing than the thing is worth. So you don't want to spend like 5 hours and $300 to secure $2,000 of Bitcoin. Like your free time is probably pretty precious. Maybe $1,000 is better. You don't want to spend that much time and effort to secure $1,000, especially if there's like a 5% chance it gets lost, right? So now you've spent hundreds of dollars and all this time for something that is like the likely cost of it is like $50, right? 5% of 1,000. So really, I mean, this is where I think we will be in 10 years. Is companies they'll have a menu of options, and then at the bottom of that menu, where it doesn't matter anymore, because they don't make any money anyway, right? Like if you have $10 million and you have it on a Trezor right now, they made $100 off of you, right? And if you lose that 10 million bucks, you're going to be really pissed off. So it doesn't make any logical sense to sell that person a Trezor in the first place. So if they were just smart, they would say up to 50,000, use a Trezor. From 50,000 to 100,000, use 3 Trezors, right? Fuck, I'm selling more hardware. Great, right? From 100,000, and there are people that you're not that far out of the normal curve yet, right? There are a lot of people that fall into that under 100,000. So you're going to sell more hardware. And then from 100,000 to say 300,000, and this is not my advice. I think this is not good enough, right? But they would do well to do something like that. Say from 100,000 to 300,000, use our hardware and one other vendor, right? In all those cases, they're making more money, and they take a lot of the criticism that I have away from them. But I think right now people are so ignorant, they don't even know that they're not 100% secure. So even opening the door, so like the open source community has to open the door and get it to the point where the incentives are where they need to be, so that these hardware wallets will start being more transparent and honest.
Sorry, can I come in there if you don't mind?
Come in.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks for the discussion. I'm new to Bitcoin, And it took me a while to understand it. I mean, really, from 2016 until last year when I came into the space. And you're talking about sort of gold standard security from a security expert point of view. I mean, most people are not technically savvy enough to be able to do the things that you're suggesting. I mean, I'm not a spokesman for Trezor. I use the new Trezor device.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So the question, the objection is like, basically, another way to read that back to you is that my advice isn't appropriate for my audience, right? Like that, what I'm telling you to do, it would be like, if some 300-pound fat ass came into my office and I'm a doctor and my advice is eat less, right? Like if I'm sure that you're not going to follow my advice, you're not capable, then that's I'm just kind of a jerk giving you that advice.
No. I'm not trying to disrespect you. I'm just trying to say in terms of, people tend to go for the easy option.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually trying to make your statement stronger for the audience. Yeah, definitely not hurting my feelings.
Yeah. So in terms of Trezor, now the new Trezor device.
Well, wait a minute. Let's keep with the generic issue, and then we can circle back to Trezor. So, so what I'm suggesting is that people need, even if they're not technical, they need to be willing to invest a weekend if it's their life savings, right? Or if they're willing to invest a weekend to secure their life savings, this is what they should do. Because if somebody says like, "That's my life savings, I just don't give a shit," I'm like, I got nothing to say to you, right? Like use a Trezor, use a phone wallet. But if you're willing to invest a weekend to secure your life savings, then this is the path that you need to go down. And I'm a security expert. I've done this stuff for a long time. I would be incompetent if I gave you advice that you couldn't follow, right? If I don't know my audience and the average person that I'm speaking to, and I'm telling them to install Ubuntu and they're completely incapable of doing that, that's me being completely incompetent. And I'm telling you that I'm not doing that, man. You could totally do this. Don't be intimidated. It's not as hard as it seems. And if you get stuck, hit me up on Slack. And I tell you what, man, I will, because I assume that you're a legitimate dude. I'll bet you $50 right now, and I'll put it into escrow if my reputation isn't good enough for $50. That if you put a weekend into this, at the end of the weekend, you'll have Ubuntu installed, you'll have a full node Bitcoin Core multi-sig wallet, and you'll be like, I don't know why this seemed like such a big deal. So if I'm wrong, you get $50.
Right. I mean, look, I'm sure. Yeah, with investing the right amount of time into it, we'll it gets picked up. But just because one of the other speakers earlier talked about the Trezor device. I mean, the new device, it doesn't come with any. It's basically everything's input on the screen of the device itself, and there are frequent updates to the software from the Trezor website itself, so that whatever software was on there gets sort of erased, and the new version directly from the website gets put on. And the device itself generates the seed words. So in that sense, it's a bit more secure.
Installing an update, arguably, I mean, it's a little bit dicey because sometimes, but forget it. It's close enough. Yes, installing an update on your Trezor is close enough to installing the software that you're on your own. So if you're saying that addresses some of it, but that's a very small portion of the problem here. It's an insignificant one. Like you need to install the software yourself. And so maybe taking an update, I still would say like, dude, don't do it. Like just partly because the principle is more important. And the principle is you need to grab the software from a very public place and install it yourself to trust it. And that applies to your laptop too, right? So your laptop, and then also you don't want to use a laptop that has malware on it with a Trezor, even if it's got an update installed. And you don't want to use Trezor servers to interact with the Bitcoin network for you. So if you're talking significant amounts of money, there's no way that you're getting out of putting in a few hours worth of work. And nobody will tell you otherwise, right? It's not controversial. You ask anybody, hey, it's my life savings. Do I need to install a full node? Nobody has the balls on Twitter to say no.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a full node installed, except that the keys are installed on a hardware wallet. away from the full node, because I'm a bit worried about the full node being, running on a laptop.
So you've already, you've already put in more hours and effort to set that up than, you like, as soon as, this is my point. If you set up your own full node and you do it properly following basic hygiene, you're doing 98% of the work required to get, and it's all the technical work too, required to get yourself set up with an appropriate cold storage device for a lot of money. But you're not doing that last 2%, and you're just leaving all that security on the table for that last 2%.
So are there instructions anywhere where you can install a full node on Ubuntu? Because I've got no experience whatsoever with that. I use, just a normal laptop on Windows, not.
Yeah, actually, so ironically enough, bitcoinsafe.io is where I send people. The problem is that some of the people that sell hardware have gone after my hosting provider, and I'm still fighting with support to get it back online. But it's just a spreadsheet. There's a lot of money at stake here, right? Like, I cost people money when I do these Clubhouse things or whatever, and they're more than happy to make my life a pain in the ass for telling you this stuff. But in the meantime, what I can do is, if you DM me, I'll send you a link to the spreadsheet that's actually the raw data behind it. And it's got links to guides that will walk you through it. And if you want to use a Trezor, we have a guide for that will tell you how to install Ubuntu, how to install Bitcoin Core, and then how to use Trezor on it. We don't recommend it, but if you're going to use a Trezor, that's the way to do it, and you'll eliminate a lot of risk.
Right. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, JW, I might hit you up in your DMs as well, just to follow up the chat that we've had today. Thank you.
Right on. Yeah, and if anybody actually wants to host this data, that might be the way that I have to go here, where we have a lot of different people hosting the data, so that these assholes that want to suppress this information have to go after a lot of people. So if you're looking for a way to kick the man in his teeth, this would be a good one.
And JW, just to clarify, the spreadsheet that you're talking about and the resources it points to, is that different from what you have listed on Yeti Cold?
Yeah, because I don't. So Yeti Cold is what I actually personally think is the best solution, and some people agree with that, and some people don't. The stuff that's on BitcoinSafe.io was anything that anybody had an opinion on, and had a link to a step-by-step guide to follow. So there's a lot of stuff that I've rated mediocre to poor on there. Like the guide for using a Trezor with your full node, I wouldn't recommend. You're doing just as much work. You're doing 98% of the work and getting 30% of the security, right? But if you want to do it, that's the way to do it. So that's like a compilation of a bunch of other people's reviews. And my intention was actually, I built that website so that it would be the non-controversial sort of advice, because what I did is, anybody that had a guide, we would throw it up there, right? Basically, any Bitcoin storage solution, anything, we'd throw it up there. And then anybody could rate it, right? And then we would just take the average of everybody. So my ratings didn't have any higher weight than the BitBlock Boom guy that threw a fit after the fact. So what happened is, I reached out to a lot of folks. They all jumped on the phone with me. I basically interviewed them, recorded their ratings, and it's a 1 to 5 rating, right? So there's no way that I could cook the books. And then it's in a Google spreadsheet, so you can check all the formulas and see that I'm just averaging stuff, that my opinions don't have any higher weighting than anybody else's. So I thought, that's surely going to take the controversy out of this stuff. But what ended up happening is, I'll use Gary as an example, because he really kind of disappointed me. His friend reached out to me, lost $50,000. I talked his friend. I spent time helping his friend get on the other side of losing his money, telling him, dude, just start stacking. I'm concerned that the guy's going to hurt himself, right? And this is Gary's friend that runs the BitBlock Boom conference. Gary's shitting on me on Twitter, saying that I'm making this stuff up, but I'm not willing to compromise the integrity of the relationship that I have with his friend, who's already, he's already gone public, semi-public with it, right? That's why all this stuff is out there. Because I've helped a lot of other people that have lost Bitcoin other than this guy. So then Gary ends up apologizing, right? Well, so months later, I have this website. I'm like, hey, let me get your opinion on some stuff. And I get on the phone with him, and it's basically an interview. Like, what storage solutions on the list are you comfortable giving me your ratings on? Is there anything else you want to add? And he's like, yeah, I want to rate Trezor because I have a friend that lost money. And I'm like, yeah, I thought you might, right? And so he rates Trezor, and he gives me comments, not very many comments, but he rates it shit, right? Well, then when I publish it, it's his name is on there, his Twitter avatar is on there. If you click on it, you can see that he rated Trezor shit, right? Well, he
Right.
puts on conferences, and guess who sponsors a lot of conferences? The hardware wallets. And so he's not only shitting on Trezor, and you know, in fairness, I oversold it in the sense that I was like, I don't think this is going to be controversial because I thought that this is too data driven for these guys to throw temper tantrums about. But it turns out, no, they were completely capable. And actually, American HODL came after me and said that I was a scammer. And the Casa guys, one of the VCs that's invested in Blockstream, actually, who was at the Bitcoin 2021 conference as a major speaker, came after me and said that I'm a scammer. And their criticism was that I didn't get permission to use their likeness, right? Like, actually, I was going back and forth with American HODL last night. If you want to look at my Twitter profile, his criticism is I'm a scammer because I didn't get permission to use their fucking Twitter avatar, right? That's how pathetic this criticism is. But at the end of the day, the reality is that it is impacting people's bottom line. Like the hardware wallet assholes that are trying to shut down my domain, they're not doing that because they don't think it's worth their time. They're doing it because truth is not going to sell. It's not going to move product.
Right.
So then Gary was also like upset, saying he didn't give me permission. And my response to that was, I will bet anybody that has given me a review 1 Bitcoin, we'll put it in an escrow account. We'll agree to add them back. Greg Maxwell, they probably don't have time for this shit, but maybe Peter Todd, Jock Mozuko, any of these guys. I'll put a Bitcoin in escrow right now. You put a Bitcoin in escrow. Then I will publish all the notes and all the data I have on our interview. And then they'll decide who gets the Bitcoin. And if I lose, I'll also take down the website. Total silence. So that's the kind of shit that the industry is right now, unfortunately. And honestly, I think that this is going to be a big deal, right? I was saying earlier, I think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of Bitcoin because these are huge, huge attack vectors. If I was a state actor, I'd be going after them. If I was a state actor, I'd be a VC invested in 2 or 3 of these storage devices and use my network to get some key employees in the right spot, right? Why the fuck not? Like, it's so obvious.
Yeah.
And then, Casa, which is American HODL, the reason that actually I got hit the hardest with American HODL coming after me was over Casa. And the Casa story there is absolutely, like, it's the perfect case study in how fucked we are, because these guys still have a good reputation. They are targeting Bitcoin maximalists. Jameson Lopp is the Barbie doll Bitcoin security expert that just came out of nowhere, that had no security expertise before Bitcoin, but now he's the security expert. And if you sign up for their most popular typical plan, it's Casa Gold. And what that means is it's fucking Coinbase. You have a piece of closed source software you have no control over. You install updates, you have no idea what it does. That's one key. They hold the other key, and it's a 2 of 3. So they have absolute control over your Bitcoin, and you don't. But this is something that American HODL's happy to call me a scammer over not endorsing.
Hey, JW, he goes by Larry Bitcoin on Twitter. It's Lawrence. I forget his last name. I think it's with an N. He works for Blockstream. Yeah. He made the green wallet.
He's a legend.
Yeah. Yeah. He, people were talking about Casa back and forth, and he didn't really say anything in favor of or against Casa, but he did say one thing, which I thought was very, very interesting. He did say that Jameson Lopp endorsed Bitcoin XT, which I had no idea he did. But then he kind of clarified it by saying, well, maybe he didn't know any better at that time. It was kind of early, in the block wars, because Bitcoin XT did come out pretty early. Yeah, so, but I thought that was very interesting.
That's a dude that's in a tough spot, speaking in parables, because anybody that knows what's going on knows that is the most damning thing possible. So let me paint this picture for you guys. This is 5 years ago, even before I was in Bitcoin, right? Because I didn't come in until after the Bitcoin Cash stuff. people start proposing that we increase the block size to a retarded size, right? They want to go like, they don't want to just go 10. They want to go like 20 megabytes. You know, they have a long term.
Well,
Yeah.
JW, if I could stop you for just a second, that was part of it. But Bitcoin XT wasn't block size increase, but it also had all this KYC bullshit in there, which was Mike Hearn's thing. Which Mike Hearn, he's got connections to the NSA. So
Wait a minute.
the big
You
block
got,
is
you
bad
gotta,
enough.
yeah, I don't even know this. Like, some people have theorized I've been in Bitcoin for a long time because I published the threat model, which incidentally, when I published the threat model, Jameson Lobb said it's the most complete security review of Bitcoin that's ever been published. So that asshole's endorsed my work, and I have not endorsed anything from his side. But yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about, man. You're telling me that I thought it was just a block size increase. So like, take your time and explain to me all that was in there.
Yeah, no, that's about it. But there was all this stuff in there about
Well, what do you mean
KYC and
KYC?
identity.
Like, how do you? I mean, it's okay if
Yeah,
you don't know the
it was
details.
in the. You know what? Let me actually. I don't have the details handy. Why don't you go ahead and explain what you know, and I'll try to see if I can find something that has more details
Okay.
on how bad Bitcoin XT
Right on.
was.
Hey,
Gosh,
before you jump into it, I just want to interrupt very quickly. I've got to run, but Hal, thank you so much for hosting and giving me the chance to bring up some of the questions I had. And JW, thank you so much for patiently walking us through all of the nuances and the details. I'll hit you up via DM just for that link and if I have other questions. Thanks,
right on,
guys.
man. Yeah. Thanks for hanging out, and yeah, thanks Hal for letting us just go wherever the conversation goes.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
So why Patrick is looking up the block size thing, and other people, there's probably somebody in this room that lived through it, other than Patrick, that knows more details. But so interrupt if you can do a better job at this. But basically the thing that happened is a bunch of bad guys basically started suggesting that we increase the block size so much that it would make it very difficult for the network to function. So pretty simple attack, right? Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to get your head around this. I think anybody that claimed security expertise and also couldn't get their head around this being a problem is either a liar. Well, they're either like a liar or a spook or something, right? Because it's that simple. And the way that it was sold was that it would give you more transactions per second, right? So Bitcoin, let's say it's at 3 transactions per second, and it's at 1 megabyte. They're saying, okay, go to 10 megabytes. It'll completely destroy the network incidentally, but you get to have 70 transactions per second. Anybody that's even vaguely technically competent would say, what in the fuck are you talking about? 70 transactions per second doesn't matter at all. Visa does millions of transactions a second. So why would we even mess with a critical security parameter to get nothing for it, right? And this is at a point where people already, like Greg Maxwell and other folks, have already theorized on how payment channels are going to work, which ends up becoming the Lightning Network. But you also have side chains that look really promising. Liquid, I think at the time, I don't think it existed yet, but I'm not totally sure on that. But either way, it was definitely like lots of smart people had solutions to get us to millions of transactions per second, at least in theory. And then these assholes were saying, hey, what if we just completely put the security of the network at risk? And they didn't even want to do that. They wanted to like ensure it was destroyed, because somebody did a bunch of research and said, we might be able to do 4 megabytes per second, but that's redlining the engine, right? After that, we're totally fucked. And these guys wanted to go that and above that. So if Jameson Loft endorsed that, which doesn't surprise me, because the fucking guy was a front end web developer, right? It's like you mop the floor, then you do customer support, then you get a job as a front end web developer, right? Like my 13-year-old kid right now is a front end web developer, and then you progress in your career. And he was a front end web developer when I got in, right? Like in 2017, 2018, that's all he did. He had no security expertise. So this guy's security expertise just appeared. He didn't need a mentorship or any of that fancy stuff. He was able to just become an expert. So that's all I know about the block size thing. I had no idea that there was other nefarious shit in there that he was endorsing, like the anti-privacy measures. So if anybody else has any comments on that.
JW, I'm actually reading an article from 2015 about it. I want to see if there's any details in there. Adam Back is basically being interviewed about Bitcoin XT and saying why it's not good. I want to see if he talks about the large blocks and why it's actually going to centralize the network. But I haven't gotten to anything regarding KYC yet. I'm still reading.
Right on. Hey, Hal, while he's doing that, I'm just going to use you as sort of devil's advocate here. Are you comfortable with, do you feel like you know enough to know that CASA's 2 of 3 is basically the worst possible thing that could be conceived of from a security standpoint?
Well, so I'm familiar with CASA's multi-sig platform, and I know that by default they try to incentivize you to use your phone as one of those keys. But if you don't go that route, then theoretically you're just using them as the 1 of 3 backups, and then the other 2 are you're able to kind of set up as you want.
Cool. I'm glad I asked you because that's not really the issue. So the issue is what they encourage you to do is exactly the worst possible thing that you could do. And that is you use a phone wallet, which is fine, but it's a closed source phone wallet. So that means that you don't have that private key. You don't have control of that key at all. In other words, if they have some code in there that says at midnight on Tuesday, the 25th, take any transaction you sign that's headed to Jameson Lopp's address and sign it, that could be in there, and there's no way that we would know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, that makes sense. I use their service for a small portion of my stuff, but I don't use their phone wallet because I wouldn't do that. Now, if you were using a 3 of 5, maybe if that's in your security, criteria. But even then, I would probably just rather own some more hardware wallets. So as yeah.
This is even weirder. Like, I really want to understand your thought process here. Like, this is fascinating to me. And I'm not trying to bust your chops because you already said you're not a security expert. So if it would be asinine to expect you to know all of this stuff after you said that you don't. But I am I kind of want to use you and kind of go through the Socratic method with you a little bit because a lot of this stuff is a mystery to me. Like, I understand the technology. What I don't understand is why people are not more uncomfortable, right? So it makes it hard for me to educate when I don't understand the other person's perspective. So to read this back to you, there's a company that is giving really, really bad advice, the worst possible advice, possibly, right? Possibly the worst possible advice on how to store your Bitcoin. And you identified that. They're like, oh, this is really fucked. And then you said, it's like you went into a doctor and they were like, hey, you've got cancer. We want to cut off your head. And you're like, no, you're not going to cut off my head. And they're like, all right, well, we can do chemotherapy and some other stuff. And you're like, okay, great, let's do it.
So the question is why I use the service even though I called out something that I felt was something that I didn't want to use? Is that the question?
No. I mean, the reason that I'm using an analogy is I'm trying to figure out where my picture of what happened or how you're thinking about this is different from the way you're thinking about it. The way that I'm thinking about it is you walked into a doctor's office, right? And you said, hey, I have a problem, right? I have cancer. I need you to solve the problem. And they recommended severing your head, right? And then you said, well, no, that would kill me. I don't want to do that. And then they said, okay, well, we can do this other thing. So to take it out of the analogy, you went to CASA and you had a problem. And your problem was, how do I secure, a significant portion of my wealth? And their answer was, do this insane thing that will give us complete control of your wealth. And you said, no, I don't want to do that. And then they said, okay, we'll do this other thing instead. And then you followed their advice. Do you understand why I'm kind of...
Yeah. So at the end of the day, so setting up multi-sig for somebody that's not super technical is obviously a kind of a barrier to entry I'd say for a lot of people. I would never, at least, okay, so for me, again, I have like a different perspective on a lot of the things that you were saying, but
Well, no, all
it
I'm
is what
saying
it
is
is, and
like
that's
you didn't
okay.
trust their advice. They gave you advice, you didn't trust them, so you obviously don't trust these people. So why are you following their advice?
No. So I trust my own best judgments, and by them suggesting me to use a phone wallet as one of my keys, I know better, and I know that my security can still be sound if I just follow the best practices that I'm aware of. And one of those decisions was to not use their phone wallet. And then, like, I agree with you in regards to like their problem is they try to make things too easy because they even mention, and I'm sure you're aware, we could go seedless with this, right? So I would never, at least for me personally, I would never suggest somebody to go into a 2 of 3 or a 3 of 5 in a seedless setting where you're not writing down your private keys. You're literally just burning them, and you're just kind of going off the cuff, and you have no way to like restore any of those seed phrases. But that doesn't mean that the product that they're offering and the ability to solve somebody's problem like my own that's not super technical, it would impair that in any means, because I am still the controller of the keys that I have set up with them. They just provide a useful interface for somebody like myself to interact with it. And while I might disagree with some of their suggestions when it comes to setting up this stuff, two of which I just mentioned, the phone hardware wallet, or the phone wallet as a backup, and the seedless. I I would never tell a newbie, hey, go to Casa and set up a multi-sig with them and just follow their instructions.
Okay,
The
let me
fact that
ask
they're
this. Let
making
me ask this because I mean I'm following you, but it's not really getting to my question. My question is, so when like if I walked into the doctor's office and I said I have cancer and they said, okay, we're going to cut off your head, I'd be like, you want to kill me, right? Like you want to hurt me would be the conclusion that I would come to, and I wouldn't want to have anything to do with that doctor. So for me, when I go look at Casa and it's like, okay, kind of the default thing is to give them complete control of your keys. I immediately start thinking about motives, right? I'm like, why would they do that? And what I'm wondering for you is like, why do you think they have their phone wallet closed source? As they're the only ones in the whole industry that do that. It's super unusual and strange, and that yet they do make it closed source, and they're also targeting high security people. Like, what do you think their motivation is for doing that?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, regardless of my opinion, and I mean, you could be
No,
right.
no,
I
no.
would
I'm
just
I'm
be
not.
analogizing, right?
I'm totally not trying to bust your chops. I'm totally trying
No,
to understand.
I don't take
Like, what did you
any
think
offense
when you
either.
saw that? Like, what did you
I
assume their
think that
motivation
they
was?
are, yeah, I think that they are attempting to make things as easy as possible, and they may be tripping over themselves.
How is it
But at the end of the
how is it easier to make it closed source?
Well, it's easier in like an onboard setting of saying that you're providing
No,
a solution to something that
no.
might be
Everybody else has
appropriate
a
or not.
phone wallet that you can install from the App Store. There's no difference. The difference is they're the only ones that hide the code.
So to be
Blue
honest with you,
Wallet's the
yeah,
same.
I don't use their like I mentioned, I don't use their phone as like a key. So I actually didn't even look into it very far because I wasn't interested. So the fact that it's closed source, like I guess, is new to me, but I'm not using it. So I guess I've never had a need to look into it.
Okay,
If
so
you're,
that's
and
fair.
also from
That's fair.
somebody that's like new, like not, again, coming not from a security standpoint, I just know better to then use like my phone as one of my keys, especially if you're talking
Right
about
on.
in a smaller multi-sig setup. If you're talking about like, 4 of 7, or you're getting to those large numbers, like, all right, screw it. Like, throw something in the mix like that. Fine, whatever. But that's not in my scheme. So
I
it
see.
doesn't
Okay.
really impact me.
All right, let me read this back to you then. So it was never a possibility in your mind of using the phone wallet. So like you signed up for the service, you didn't really notice whether you didn't even know it was closed source. You just chose not to use the phone wallet for other good instincts, by the way. And now you're finding out, or maybe you heard about it later, and it just didn't seem interesting because you weren't using it. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd probably throw myself in that category. Correct.
Okay. No, that totally makes sense, man. And I appreciate you letting me kind of psychologize you a little bit, try to dig in there because it really, like this one flabbergasted me a lot.
No, yeah, and
so
it
now
is super interesting because you're right though. Like if somebody sets up a casa and they're using if they're doing the gold where they're having like 2 of 3 and they control one, and theoretically under worst case scenarios they control your phone as well. Theoretically they do have access. And yeah, you're in Bitcoin. Like you have to take your security measures like very like guard it very closely. So that makes sense.
So
But
let me propose this to you. Now that you're aware of the issue, let me propose a theory. And you don't have to take it. I want to get this out there, and you can come back to me later and be like, yeah, I looked into it. I really don't think this is the case. My theory is that Jameson Lopp is a bad guy. That he supported attacks on Bitcoin in the past. That he promoted Grin and shitcoins. I was on a podcast with him once when we were still like friendly, right? He was my biggest promoter. The only reason most people know my name at this point is because he promoted my stuff a lot. Then I went on a podcast with him, and he tried to argue that Lightning was a altcoin. And from then on, we have not been buddies, right? But then he tried to promote Grin, and he's done some other shady stuff. So my argument is like, look, this dude has a track record of being questionable. Then you combine that with the fact that most of the users that they're going after are going to end up in Casa Gold. So that's like anybody that knows products is going to know that the majority of the users, they're going to sign up for something 50 or $100. They're not going to sign up for something that's several thousand. Even somebody that's securing a couple $1 million is probably going to sign up for just based on pricing. They're going to end up with something that's 50 or $100 because people have a very strange expectation of pricing when it comes to stuff like software products, right? So then you look at their main product, and there's something very odd about their main product, and that is that they are completely in control of your keys. And what I mean by that is the software that's on your phone, the software that's on your phone today, yesterday, and tomorrow, they have complete control over, and nobody has the ability to look at that code. So that gives them complete control of one key. They hold the other key, and it's a 2 of 3. So all of that combined tells me they're bad guys, right? I fully believe that they're planning on running off with your Bitcoin. They're planning on screwing you in some way. I think that's the whole purpose of the company. Now that's been my like working theory, right? That's the only way I can hang together the facts that I've just outlined to you. And I haven't heard a really good viable alternative for why they're behaving like this. I will say that Jameson Lopp at one point tried to defend this position, which by the way, they very rarely talk about it. They won't even address it. They just go silent if the conversation comes up. That's their strategy because for whatever reason that's clearly their strategy. You can see their behavior on Twitter when it comes to this stuff. At one point, Jameson got pushed enough to where he said the reason that we closed sourced the wallet was because we wanted to be able to make sure that at least 2 of your 3 keys are backed up, right? In other words, we have to be in control of your keys in order to make sure that you don't lose them. You can look on Twitter. He hasn't deleted it. That was his argument. Now, for me, if somebody says, I want to cut off your head, and I'm like, what, are you trying to kill me? And their response doesn't make sense, then I become more convinced they're trying to kill me, right? Like, you trying to cut off my head? No, I'm trying to eat a popsicle. You're like, what the fuck does a popsicle have to do with cutting off my head? You're clearly a bad guy at this point, right? Like, the more they lie, the more convinced I become that my working theory is correct. There's no reason that they need to make the wallet software closed source in order to make sure that it's backed up. That makes absolutely no sense at all. Everybody else can back up software and make it open source. The only difference between what they're doing now and what it would be if it was open source is if they just took the code and they posted it on a website so people like Lawrence and me and others could find out if it's doing something bad. That's it. That's all they have to do. So it doesn't, like, their justification that they've made public does not make any sense. So I don't know what you guys think about it, but I honestly have not heard anybody throw out a viable or even really an alternative theory to what's going on here. Any ideas? I mean, how can we interpret that stuff more generously? I'm open to it.
Guys, before you chip in, I just want to thank everyone for their contribution. I've got to be off to work, and I'll DM you if you don't mind for those links. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, JW, I think I found what it was. It wasn't KYC. It was blacklisting of addresses. That
Which ones?
Was a feature in
in
Bitcoin X. In Bitcoin XT, there was a feature where you could blacklist certain addresses or certain traffic. That's what it was.
Just to make it
and for some reason, I got that. I mean, it's basically KYC.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Crazy. I had no idea that was ever proposed. That's wild. So, I mean, to explain to everybody what's going on there, they wanted to make it super easy so that you could make your node basically reject transactions that you didn't think were good, right? Which that sounds innocuous, but the only reason to make it really easy for you to reject transactions is if they were planning on trying to fork the network, right? To have nodes disagree, so that certain set of nodes said, all right, Satoshi's coins are no longer movable, or Ross's coins, are no longer movable, or whatever. So that's very deeply nefarious, and that's interesting. I had no idea of that, man. Thanks for looking that up. Send me a link. DM me a link to that. I want to read more about that.
Yeah, actually, it was from Hearn himself. I was trying to because I'm just trying to look up what the feature of Bitcoin XT were. It was from Mike Hearn himself. I couldn't find anything from Peter Todd or Adam Beck pointing it out, but I guess in defending Bitcoin XT, Mike Hearn did mention
that. Totally unreal. And so Jameson Lopp, just to add to his resume now at this point, he also endorsed something that would have destroyed the Bitcoin network because it was increasing the block size too much, and introduced censorship that would have destroyed the Bitcoin network. That's pretty good. Yeah, you guys should definitely have your life savings with Casa. Don't make any changes there. Everything is completely reasonable.
Hey, JW, if I could slightly shift the conversation. I'm curious.
Before you do, man,
what would you say to people I want to
hear from anybody that has an alternative theory. If they do, if nobody has an opinion, that's cool too. But if anybody actually,
I think you're the leading.
I mean, does anybody think that Casa is not planning on screwing users and running off with the money, and that they needed to close source that for some other reason?
Is Casa insured?
Getting insurance on Bitcoin is like near next to impossible. I guess at the end of the day, while I think it's great that people are concerned about other people, and I think people should be reviewing code, as long as I know that my funds are in my control, I guess kind of that's selfishly kind of the extent of somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of background and experience in hardware security and stuff like that.
Well, let me tell you, man, you don't have enough experience and you don't have enough knowledge to be comfortable with any solution that involves Casa, because you've walked into the caves with Al Qaeda and they've given you some advice on how to create a bomb.
But with that topic in mind, though, with that topic in mind, though, I'm not a Bitcoin expert either, right? And there's a lot of people like me that have no technical knowledge that are trying to be involved in the space.
Yeah. So that's a good pushback, and I think that's worth talking about, because most people, they have to look to experts at some point. However, it's not hard to tell the difference between a Jameson Lopp and an Adam Beck or a Greg Maxwell. So what you need to do if you're in anything, right? Like what you would do with a doctor is you would evaluate people on the things that you understand. So if you walk in the office and they say, cut off your head to solve cancer, what you should do as a non-expert is say, I'm not a doctor. I don't know everything, but I know enough to know this guy just tried to fucking kill me. And as a result, I'm not going to trust him moving forward, right? He's on my mental blacklist. By you not doing that, I think there's two possibilities. One, you're in somebody's pocket. Two, you just haven't thought this through very well yet.
No, okay. So then an alternative, I guess, to that would be because you mentioned, right? Okay, you're at a doctor's office. They give you some advice that you're going to be questioning, right? What do? You go get a second opinion. It seems like you have an opinion that, whether true or not, a lot of people don't agree with or follow. And I'm not saying it's not correct. I'm just saying if we're talking about grabbing alternative opinions, it seems like the consensus in the space is not the one that you're coming to.
Yeah, but that's not how you do it.
It's just interesting, right?
Yeah, totally. But that's not how you would do it, right? In real life, you wouldn't go, well, I'm going to go get 4 more opinions. And If 5 people in a row tell me to cut off my head, then that's clearly the solve of cancer. What you would do is you would ask them to explain, like the first guy, maybe you'd go, well, let's use chemo as an example instead, because that's more legitimate, right? So they say, hey, we want to do chemo, and you don't trust the answer. You would ask them to explain how chemo works and why it would be good, right? And then you would go to 4 or 5 other people, and if you found out that like it's total shit because you started learning more about it, then you would write off all of those people, right? A better analogy is like you go into a doctor's office and they offer you a product like that's going to remove your head, right? Because it's completely against all of your instincts, right? And then it turns out that they're going to get paid a lot of money for doing that. And then you go get 10 other people's opinion, and it turns out, yeah, a lot of people that are either sponsored or one way or another making money off of this think that it's a great idea. But the other people, they're not even making a statement from authority. They're just simply walking you through how the blood flows to your brain and saying, look, you can do it if you want. I don't have any skin in the game, whether you cut your head off or not. It's not going to put money in my pocket. But I'm explaining to you the fundamentals of why you should be concerned about it, right? And then once you grasp those fundamentals that, yeah, blood really does need to go in and out of your brain to stay alive, you write off all of those people. And you, as a complete pleb, non-technical person, should be doing that right now with something like Casa. They told you to run closed source code and give them one of the other keys. That's like cutting off your head. You will not find anybody that says closed source software is a good idea or can provide a plausible explanation. So you should be running from that group of, that's enough for you to know that everybody that endorses Casa is either incompetent or evil. And that solves 98% of the problems that you're looking at. You don't have to be technical to do that. So it's weird that you're unwilling.
JW, I think what's going on is people are not very tech savvy to start with for the most part, like the common person out there. And then second of all, even people who are tech savvy don't necessarily know exactly how the Bitcoin network works. So when they're like, okay, I need to secure my keys or whatever, they're like, all right, there's some company out there. It sounds good. I don't think they have enough time to dive into it,
No, I
even though
get
they
that, man.
should.
I get that. But what I'm saying is like, I've explained to you guys why it's important that it's open source. It's not
Yeah.
hard for any thinking person to understand.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not hard at all. There's nothing complicated about it. It is actually as simple as explaining why your brain needs to be attached to your body.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And
Yet,
I
people
like
are not
totally
like,
agree
oh,
with
I'm
you.
freaking out and I'm going to go look into this. Like, follow Hal and tell me in 2 weeks if he's come out and said, you know what, I'm writing off Jameson Lopp and everybody else that's ever endorsed Casa because this is a fucking terrible solution. And all of these guys are either incompetent or lying. It's not going to happen, right? I can tell you right now, I'll bet money it's not going to happen. So one of the possibilities, like the only real likelihood is that it's about money, right? It's about money, influence, whatever, right? Status. You don't want to, even if you're not getting paid, right? I fully believe American HODL is getting paid to cover this shit up, right? And to come out and attack me. But if he's not getting paid, it's because he wants to retain influence. There's one way or another, those palms are getting greased because there's no way that that I can explain to you guys so simply why it's important this thing is open sourced, and everybody else just can't get their head around it. That's not plausible in this universe.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's probably something nefarious going on, especially since we're in like the pre-internet days of Bitcoin. So there's definitely going to be some weird stuff going on. I don't know until it gets more regulated, or who the hell knows what. But like I came to this space and heard you talking, and I'm someone who has not taken self-custody yet because I don't understand enough about how hardware wallets work and all that kind of stuff. So I just didn't want to do something, without knowing, if that makes sense. Like I want to know I'm screwing
No, it
myself
totally makes
before
sense.
I screw
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily you're doing anything dumb here. You definitely have to just ask questions and get up to speed. What I'm trying to do is, instead of like the way that a lot of these conversations end up going is like, oh, Trezor's great, oh, Yeti Cold is great, and I'm trying to dig down into motivation, or dig down into like the very basics of how open source software works and where you get to the point where you can trust it, and then two, point out when other people are blatantly contradicting those things, and then ask people to consider motivation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I totally get you. And after listening to what you said about Trezor and Ledger, I am not comfortable taking self custody in that manner. Now, let me ask you like one question though about your solution, where I'm assuming like in the DAT files, where when you put it onto the CD in the DAT file, that's the private key. And then I'm just wondering, how do you protect those from destruction, or is there a backup? Like say like from fire, for instance, if all those CDs were in your house and they all burned up, like would you be shit out of luck or?
Sorry, I can't seem to unmute here. There we go. Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So one of the great things about, actually, I'm going to call it multi-key from now on instead of multi-sig because it's a little more clear. With multi-key Bitcoin, you like with Yeti, you end up with a 3 of 7. And so what that means is you have 7. When you're done with setup, you erase your laptops and everything. You end up with 7 envelopes. And you take those 7 envelopes and you distribute them geographically, preferably a plane ride's involved if it's a lot of money to be able to get to 3 of them. And you've got to get 3 of those envelopes in order to spend. So if you have one of those envelopes with an accountant and they end up digging into it for some God knows why reason and discovering that there's Bitcoin related stuff there, they still can't spend your money. They would have to go attack 2 other locations in order to be able to do that. And you can still lose 4 of them, right? So I was talking earlier about if, let's say that you had 10 Bitcoin and you put 1 Bitcoin on each hardware wallet, and then you spread them out. That's better from the standpoint of like losing or stealing, having somebody steal all of your Bitcoin. But it's way worse from the standpoint of having somebody take some of your Bitcoin, right? You'd be better off just having 1 and then guarding that with your life than having 10 if your goal was to lose nothing, right? But multi-sig gives you the best of both worlds because you can have, or multi-key, because you can have it set up where you can lose a couple and you lose nothing, and you have to lose a bunch before you lose something. I don't know if that was the best way to explain it, but yeah, at the end of the day, you have 7 envelopes and they're geographically distributed. So if your house burns down, it doesn't matter because you have 3 other locations that need 4 other locations that need to burn down before you lose your Bitcoin.
Okay, got it. And then my other question was, you were saying that like anytime that you want to deposit more money into that wallet that you've created, you have to like set up a whole computer and set up the node again. But I thought, like, I was under the impression that when you create a wallet, it's got 2 keys, right? Public and private. So when you created that one, wouldn't you have a public like key always available to always like put money into it?
Yeah. So I mean, what you end up with in those 7 wallets is, and this is more technical than you really need to be. So don't get intimidated if you're listening to this, because any decent guide is going to step you through whatever you need to do, right? You just do the shit that it says to do, right? Like you grab the thing, you scan the QR code. I don't know how you need to be technical to do stuff like that, but that's the argument that people selling you stuff use. So you'll be stepped through this, and you don't have to know these terms, but you've got 7 envelopes. In each one of those envelopes, you have what's called a seed, HD seed, which is basically your it's like your master password, and you've got 7 different ones, right? 7 envelopes, 7 different master passwords or keys. Would be maybe, I don't know. When we get this technical, it's really hard not to use the actual term, so I'm just going to do it. So you have 7 HD seeds in each of these wallets, and in order to spend Bitcoin, you need 2 things. You need 3 of those HD seeds, and you need your descriptor, and your descriptor is like your public key, and your HD seed is like your private key. It's not exactly, because your HD seed, it's close enough. So in order to just watch your Bitcoin, all you need is that descriptor. So if you were going to go through the process of making a deposit and you didn't have any computer set up, everything was totally safe and just in envelopes, completely off any electronic devices, you would go grab one of those envelopes, scan the descriptor, and then your laptop would be able to show you your Bitcoin balance and you can make deposits. But in order to spend, you would need 3 of those wallets. or 3 of those envelopes, and put those all in as well.
All right, great. Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking. So basically, if you set up this very secure system like you're talking about, you can still deposit to it, but in order to spend from it, you would have to go around to your geographic locations, get 3 keys, which is good functionality, because that's all I'm looking to do is stack on Coinbase and then periodically deposit into some super secure system. So you're saying like that functionally would work, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's definitely what I would recommend. And I guess I hate Coinbase so much I instinctively wanted to send you somewhere else, but I can't think of anywhere else. So yeah, that's the way to go.
Well, I mean, how else do you buy from the U.S.? Isn't Coinbase like the most secure?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, Coinbase has been shitheads, but they're all shitcoin casinos that are trying to screw people over. So just, Coinbase is fine. Who cares? As long as you get Bitcoin and then you get it secured far away from any of those assholes, you're doing the right thing.
Guys, you got to use that Strike app to stack, man. Definitely use Strike. It's the best way to stack.
Oh,
Fuck Coinbase.
yeah, actually, yeah, I like it. I agree. It depends on how much you're doing, I think. Another great option is the Swan Bitcoin guys are freaking great. So, yeah, those are 2 great options. And actually Cash App too. I mean, those guys have been really good supporters of the network. That said, like, don't freak out over like trying to, I don't want to say virtue signal, but it's way more important that you don't lose your Bitcoin, right? It's important to all of us, because if you lose your Bitcoin, it's going to end up in the hands of some scammer or piece of shit that's going to sell it, and the people of El Salvador are going to be a little bit more fucked because of it. So
the more Bitcoin, the more Bitcoin that's lost, man, the more the value goes up for the rest of us that still have it.
I'm not saying lost. I'm saying stolen. But yeah, if it's lost, then that's a donation to humanity. But yeah, so definitely consider using one of the other better people that support the community more. But it's way secondary, dude, to just coming up with a good Bitcoin storage solution where you don't lose your keys. So yeah, fuck Coinbase, but also way more importantly, fuck the hardware wallet guys and anybody else that's trying to put you into a shitty storage solution.
Yeah, hey guys, I think I'm gonna run, so I'm probably gonna shut this down. But I really appreciate your guys' time and the conversation. So yeah, thanks for providing all the info and whatnot.
Yeah, Hal.
Thanks for hosting, Hal.
Tweet out and let us know if you decide that Coinbase or Casa are bad actors or not. I'll be looking for that.
Yeah, stay tuned. All right, thanks guys, appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Take care.